Chapter 290. At dawn the next day, Leng Shiqi came to the back mountain of Wuxiang Palace. Wuxiang was already waiting here. Leng Shiqi came early because he was afraid he would be later than Wuxiang, but he was still late. Wuxiang said directly, "Next I will suppress my cultivation to the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. You have to be determined to kill me and use your strongest spirit technique to kill me. If you can force me to move my body or use power beyond the early stage of the spirit pulse realm, you win." Leng Shiqi didn't speak. A heavy wooden spear appeared in his hand. This was the level 4 spirit tool Astral Wood Spirit Spear he bought at a high price. Holding the spear, Leng Shiqi's aura was unparalleled. The tip of his spear thrust forward, and the spear body suddenly drew a huge gray cross in the air as it rushed over. Leng Shiqi didn't test it and used the formation breaking cross spear right away. However, Formless only extended a finger and lightly flicked it. The cross-shaped light disappeared into nothingness, and the tip of the spear was stopped by Formless' finger. Brave and unparalleled, this spear is not bad. However, you didn't have the resolve to die when you charged into the enemy's formation, nor did you have the resolve to kill me. Therefore you are still somewhat lacking. Leng Shiqi expected the formation-breaking cross spear to be easily broken, but it was also unexpected. What he didn't expect was that Wuxiang would be able to break through his attack so easily. Moreover, his spear was a level 4 spirit weapon, yet it couldn't even hurt Wuxiang's finger? He could clearly feel that Wuxiang only used the power of the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. But how did he do it? This wasn't just perfect control of power, it also meant that Wuxiang's body was terrifyingly strong. Leng Shiqi's body wasn't weak, but it wasn't enough in front of Wuxiang. Since he was already close, Leng Shiqi put away his spear and punched. A tiger phantom pounced with the power to break rivers and sink oceans. Wuxiang directly slapped away the tiger's shadow, and the invisible inner strength that entered his body did not have any reaction. Both inside and outside. Not bad, but the overall power is not enough. This was also a problem that Leng Shiqi had discovered. He was also trying to integrate Violent Lion's Fury Forest Fist into Tiger's Wave-Stomping Fist. However, he had been studying swordsmanship and illusions in the secret realm and had not had the time to study the fist art. On the contrary, Falling Blossoms and Dazzling Blossoms had already merged together. Leng Shiqi's fist didn't work, so he used another palm. The 6 palms combined into 1.5 feet tall palm shadow with faint flames smashed down with a loud bang. The formless palms slashed downwards, instantly splitting the 6 yang poison fire palm into 2 halves before dissipating in mid-air. What a vicious palm strike. You have some skills. However, it's strong on the outside and weak on the inside. Once it encounters an extremely ferocious spiritual technique, it will collapse upon contact. Leng Shiqi had yet to discover the weakness of the 6 yang poisonous fire palm that Wuxiang had mentioned. The follow-up of this palm strike could be strengthened from this aspect. Next, Leng Shiqi used Earth Fiend Demon Claw, Violent Lion's Fury Forest Fist, and Blood Sky Finger respectively. All of them were easily broken by Wuxiang. However, when he used Blood Sky Finger, Wuxiang muttered, "It's actually at the Great Perfection stage." He knew that Leng Shiqi had chosen this spiritual technique in the Blood Book Hall. At that time he had also blocked Leng Shiqi there. Therefore Wuxiang also knew that Leng Shiqi had only used this spiritual technique for 3 months. To be able to cultivate a level 4 spiritual technique to the Great Perfection stage in 3 months, Leng Shiqi's comprehension surprised him. However, what he didn't know was that Leng Shiqi had only used a dozen breaths of time to cultivate Blood Sky Finger to the Great Perfection stage. Every time Wuxiang broke a move he would point out the weakness of the move. Leng Shiqi had fewer and fewer things that he could take out. Soon after he retreated and his mental energy surged. His left hand lit up with faint starlight and then a giant ice sword nearly 2 feet long whistled out. What surprised Leng Shiqi was that Wuxiang also formed a spiritual seal with his hand and formed an even more powerful giant flame sword. Leng Shiqi's giant ice sword melted before it even got close. In the end, it turned into a cloud of mist like a moth to a flame. Wuxiang is also a spiritual caster. This was the first time Leng Shiqi knew of Wuxiang's ability. He couldn't help but be surprised, because he found that Wuxiang's spiritual technique, physical strength, and mental power were all very strong. This was very similar to him. It was also at this moment that Leng Shiqi vaguely felt that it wasn't a coincidence that Wuxiang took him as a disciple. But now was not the time to be distracted. He formed a series of seals and flames surrounded his body to form a giant pillar of fire that shot out. The giant flame sword collided with the pillar of fire and exploded. Waves of fire spread out and scorched the surrounding ground. When the waves of fire dissipated, Leng Shiqi was wearing a set of pitch-black demon armor. Wuxiang carefully looked at Leng Shiqi's demonic beast blood pattern armor. He felt traces of killing intent from Leng Shiqi. He nodded and said, "Interesting. You finally have the resolve to kill me." The black jade sword was unsheathed. The sharp blade of the level 5 spirit artifact spat out a glaring sword light. Leng Shiqi's spirit and mental power quickly circulated. His aura climbed higher and higher. When his aura reached its peak, Leng Shiqi suddenly disappeared. He suddenly disappeared in front of Wuxiang's eyes. At this moment, countless beautiful flower petals fell from the sky. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. But there was a huge killing intent hidden in these flower petals. Suddenly the flower petals spun and shot towards Wuxiang. It turned out that each flower petal was a sword energy. Wuxiang murmured, "He actually pulled me into an illusion in an instant. Illusionary and real, real and fake. This move is not bad." At this moment, to Wuxiang's surprise, 36 phantoms appeared out of thin air and surrounded him. Each phantom was a sword light that intersected with the sword energy in the air. From afar, it formed the illusion of a giant flower. In an instant, the sword light raged and the sword energy rampaged. Chaotic flower's dazzling eyes. Combining movement, sword energy and illusion into one. This was the true chaotic flower's dazzling eyes. Wuxiang finally became cautious. He formed a sword with his finger and a sharp sword intense sword into the sky. Suddenly, countless invisible sword energy burst out and instantly destroyed all the phantoms and flower petals. But he still looked around vigilantly. He did not relax at all because he did not find Leng Shiqi's real body. The next moment, a long river of sword light broke out from the ground and stabbed at Wuxiang's chassis. "Insidious!" Wuxiang shouted in a low voice and pressed down with his palm. An invisible force pressed down, preventing Leng Shiqi's sword from moving forward. But at this moment, Leng Shiqi changed his sword for a sword. A cold sword light slashed out as if it was splitting the sky. Wuxiang felt a chill in his crotch and his whole body trembled. Chapter 291. Inside Wuxiang Palace, Leng Shiqi sat weakly on a chair while Wuxiang paced back and forth with lingering fear. Not long ago he almost lost his little brother. Leng Shiqi's flash in the pan took more than 80% of his strength, but it also allowed Wuxiang to use strength that exceeded the early stage of the spirit pulse realm. In other words, Leng Shiqi won. However, ever since they came back, Wuxiang had been pacing back and forth. Leng Shiqi was a little dizzy, but he couldn't say anything. After a while, Wuxiang finally stopped and said to Leng Shiqi, "Master has nothing to teach you. As long as you can make up for the shortcomings I mentioned, you can at least beat one person." Leng Shiqi heard what he said. It seemed that this bet wasn't one-on-one, so he asked, "Master, what are the rules of the bet?" Wuxiang replied, "It's an arena battle. Whoever stands on the arena in the end will be the winner. If it was an arena battle, then there might be a situation of 1 versus 2 or even 1 versus 3. However, before Leng Shiqi could think about it, a gray-clothed disciple appeared outside the door. "Master Wuxiang, Delta Orgi wants to see Leng Shiqi." "Delta Orgi is here?" Leng Shiqi's heart skipped a beat. Wuxiang immediately pulled Leng Shiqi and said, "TSK, you're quite capable. Don't forget what Master said, get a few spirit techniques." Leng Shiqi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he guessed that Delta Orgi was here for the spirit techniques. After a while, Leng Shiqi brought Delta Orgi back to his small courtyard. Delta Orgi went straight to the point and said, "The 300 drops of blood have been given to me. I'm here to fulfill my promise." Leng Shiqi said politely, "If I hadn't accepted the mission to assassinate Ozu, causing a delay of 3 months, I'm afraid you would have already been promoted to a blood-clothed assassin. But if it weren't for this trip, I wouldn't have seen the heavenly phenomenon of the southern divine peak, and my cultivation wouldn't have advanced so quickly. You won't realize that there is such a big gap between us." At this point, Delta Orgi's tone had a complicated meaning. Leng Shiqi knew that Delta Orgi's competitive nature was showing again. In this trip to the southern divine peak with Delta Orgi, the strength shown by Delta Orgi was far inferior to that of Leng Shiqi, whether it was against Ozu or the pursuit of Gang Spirit Realm. Although Delta Orgi was already very strong among the same level, she knew very well that the gap between them and Leng Shiqi was huge. Unknowingly, Leng Shiqi had left her in the dust. This made her very uncomfortable. This matter had instead become the motivation for Delta Orgi to cultivate even harder. Now she was no longer curious about the colorful world outside. She just wanted to improve her strength as soon as possible. Delta Orgi continued, Before doing the mission, I promised to give you spiritual skills. But we've only done one mission, and I've already thought of a way to get the remaining blood drops, so I can only give you a third-level spiritual skill as a reward. Okay. Lung Shichi could accept it completely. He even felt that he had made a small profit. Delta Origi took out a piece of paper with the names of 4 spiritual skills written on it. Pick one. Lung Shichi looked at it and asked, "Why don't you just give me the secret manual of the spiritual skill?" If that was the case, he could directly use his infinite skill points to learn it. That would be a huge profit. Although Delta Origi was wearing a mask, Lung Shichi could feel that she was rolling her eyes at him. It's too troublesome to write them one by one. Besides, do you think I don't know that you have a photographic memory? You still want to take advantage of me? Lung Shichi smiled embarrassedly. Fortunately, with the mask, he didn't make a fool of himself. Then he carefully looked at the contents of the paper. The 4 spiritual skills on it were Triple Origin Cyan Spirit Sword, Impermanent Steps, Shifting Bone Technique, and Red Poison Curse. Lung Shichi directly eliminated the first 2. He didn't need the third-level blade and movement techniques at the moment, so he could only choose between the remaining 2. The Shifting Bone Technique was a spiritual skill that could slightly change one's body shape. Lung Shichi had a human skin mask and a voice-changing technique. If combined with the Shifting Bone Technique, he could change into many different identities. It was a practical spiritual skill that could conceal one's identity. The Red Poison Curse was a spiritual skill that was similar to a curse. The reason why Lung Shichi wanted this spiritual skill was because his centipede curse could no longer keep up with his cultivation. Before the 4th realm of heaven, the centipede curse was still very useful. However, for spirit cultivators in the spirit pulse realm, the centipede curse was easily suppressed. For example, the black-veiled woman last time, she only used a few breaths of time to suppress the centipede curse. He believed that she would be able to expel the centipede curse from her body in no time. Therefore, Lung Shichi also wanted a spiritual skill that could control others. But after pondering for a while, he finally chose the Shifting Bone Technique. He wanted the Red Poison Curse, but he currently had the ability to control illusions, so he didn't need it. Moreover, he could use his blood droplets to exchange for this kind of spiritual technique. However, the Shifting Bone Technique was different. He often went out, so it was very important to conceal his identity. Moreover, this spiritual skill was probably related to the Bone Demon, so it probably couldn't be exchanged. Thus, Lung Shichi said, "I want the Shifting Bone Technique." Delta Origi said, "I knew you would choose this. I've already prepared it for you." As she spoke, she took out a secret manual. "This spiritual skill can't be taught to outsiders, but Master said that you performed well in the Southern God Peak, so he made an exception." Lung Shichi didn't understand what the Bone Demon meant by performed well. However, since it was personally instructed by the Bone Demon, he felt even more at ease. "I just started cultivating the Shifting Bone Technique, so I don't have any insights to give you. Of course, I don't think you need it. By the way, although I believe you won't do this, I still have to say that you can't spread it." "Of course," Lung Shichi said seriously. Then he changed the topic. "You should know about the bet." Speaking of this, Delta Origi's body tensed up. She said seriously, "I know. This matter is very important. We can only win, not lose." Lung Shichi said, "You don't have to put too much pressure on yourself. The disciples of the Lioha spiritual region have their advantages, but we also have advantages that they don't have." "I understand what you're saying. This is also the method I mentioned before to obtain large amounts of blood drops. What do these two have to do with each other?" Lung Shichi couldn't help but be puzzled. Delta Origi said, "Of course it's related. If we win the bet, do you think we'll win for nothing? When the time comes, I'll ask the sect for blood drops. They'll definitely agree." This is indeed a method. Lung Shichi nodded. He also wondered if he should ask for something if he won. Chapter 292. 10 days later at the Blood Kill Hall. All the big shots of the Blood Robe Pavilion had arrived. The 2 pavilion elders, the pavilion leader, Hateful Blade, the vice pavilion leader, Ink Frost Ghost, and the disciplinary grand elder, Bone Devil, were all present. Other than them, there were Formless, Lung Shichi, Delta Origi, Yushu, and Hungming. After so many days, Lung Shichi finally got to see Yushu and Hungming. Yushu was still the same black-robed assassin. He was currently wearing a mask that only revealed his eyes and winking at Lung Shichi. As for Hungming, he still had that unapproachable expression on his face. It seems like they haven't changed much, Lung Shichi thought to himself. He had thought that Yushu would change after becoming the pavilion master's personal disciple. He thought that Yushu would look down on him, the disciple of the underworld Bloodkill Pavilion. Then, Yushu would use his powerful cultivation to slap him in the face. But that was not the case at all. The four of them had stood out from tens of thousands of people. If they didn't even have that little bit of temperament, it would be a waste. Not long after, 5 people walked into the Bloodkill Hall. The one at the front was an old man with an elegant temperament. He didn't have the slightest bit of aura, but every step he took felt like he was stepping on the pulse of heaven and earth. It was as if he had become one with heaven and earth. Behind the old man were 4 youths, 3 boys and 1 girl. They all looked to be around 15 or 16 years old. The 4 of them looked left and right curiously, as if they rarely went out of the house. However, the cultivation bases of these 4 youths were extremely terrifying. 2 were at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, and 2 were at the spirit vein realm. They were the geniuses of the 6 direction spiritual zone, the opponents of Lung Shichi and the others. After these people entered the Bloodkill Hall, Hateful Blade and the others stood up to welcome them. Only the 2 elders remained seated. Hateful Blade said, "Elder Xiao, please excuse me for not going out to meet you." Elder Xiao said bluntly, "We don't have much time. Let's begin." Hateful Blade didn't say anything. He used his palm as a blade and chopped down. With his palm as the center, ripples appeared in the space. Those ripples spread out, covering the entire Bloodkill Hall. Lung Shichi was shocked to find that the surrounding scenery had suddenly changed into a grassland. He was stunned at first. Then he rubbed the ground with his feet and realized that the grass and soil on the ground were all real. Huge waves of emotions surged in his heart. Changing space with a flip of his hand, what kind of heaven-defying ability was this? At this time, Elder Xiao also looked deeply at Hateful Blade, and a trace of fear flashed through his eyes. Those big shots didn't have any special reaction, but the 4 young men and women couldn't help but exclaim. Delta Origi and the others were also shocked, but they did not show it. Elder Xiao coughed lightly, and the 4 youths immediately restrained their expressions and calmed down. Hateful Blade said, "Let's do it here. You should be clear about the rules. Let the battle begin." As soon as Hateful Blade finished speaking, the atmosphere instantly became heavy. Yushu hugged a long blade and walked forward a few steps. He laughed and said, "My name is Yushu from Yushu. Who wants to exchange a few blows with me?" His tone was full of frivolity as if he didn't care about the other party at all. The 4 disciples of the Lioha spiritual zone's expressions changed. Some of them even showed a trace of anger. Elder Xiao frowned slightly at first, but he immediately calmed down and didn't say anything. A young man in luxurious clothes walked up. His eyes were filled with anger as he said, "Humph, arrogant. I Xiaofu will let you know what it means to say that there is always someone better than you." This person was one of the spirit transformation disciples of the Lioha spiritual zone, Xiaofu. The bracelet on his right wrist flashed slightly, and a gorgeous spirit blade appeared in his hand. Lung Shichi's eyes narrowed. He had clearly seen that Xiaofu was using a mustard seed bracelet. A mustard seed bracelet was also a storage spirit tool, but its storage space was far greater than a mustard seed bag, and it was better at hiding. However, the value of a mustard seed bracelet was far greater than a mustard seed bag. Xiaofu was only at the spirit transformation realm, but he could wear a mustard seed bracelet. From this, it could be seen that the Lioha spiritual zone's foundation was indeed very rich. Yushu's attention was completely focused on Xiaofu's spirit blade. The handle and blade of the blade were inlaid with light blue gems, and it looked very gorgeous. Yushu said, "You also use a blade. Sure, you can show me some moves." Xiaofu seemed to be even angrier. He didn't answer and directly attacked with his blade in anger. However, his blade aura was very ethereal. The light blue gems on the blade flickered endlessly, and then a blade light like a blue moon spilled out. This blade was stunning. Lung Shichi couldn't help but secretly nod. Although Xiaofu's temperament wasn't very good, his strength was truly strong. This blade was actually somewhat similar to the waning moon rapid light slash he had first comprehended. However, the difference was that his waning moon rapid light slash pursued extreme sharpness, while Xiaofu's blade pursued ethereal intent. This kind of blade aura was inevitably a bit flashy. The blue moon fell, but Yushu didn't panic at all. He unsheathed his spirit blade and slashed out with a blade aura. However, his blade aura was strange and ruthless. It was like a storm that directly shattered Xiaofu's blue moon. Xiaofu's expression changed slightly. His blade aura immediately changed, becoming dignified and majestic. The 2 completely opposite blade auras continued to clash, and the spectators were a bit dazzled. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that overall Xiaofu had the upper hand. Delta Origi asked Lung Shichi, "Who do you think will win?" Lung Shichi said, Both of them are at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, but Xiaofu's cultivation method is clearly better than Yushu's. His spirit force is 30% stronger than Yushu's. In addition, Xiaofu's spirit technique and spirit blade are stronger than Yushu's. If this continues, Yushu will undoubtedly lose. Then what do you mean? Yushu will win. Delta Origi didn't understand. You were the one who said Yushu was inferior to Xiaofu, and now you're the one who said Yushu will win? Lung Shiqi whispered, I know Yushu better than you do. Just watch. In the battle, Xiaofu continued to suppress Yushu. At this moment, Yushu was clearly at a disadvantage and even showed signs of defeat. Xiaofu's blade emitted a faint blue light. He found a flaw in Yushu's defense and slashed down. Puchi. Xiaofu's blade cut deeply into Yushu's shoulder. He sneered, Aren't you arrogant? Try being arrogant again. Seeing this, the other three disciples of the Six Unity spiritual realm all revealed expressions of relief. However, Yushu also smiled strangely. In the next moment, a saber had appeared in his left hand at some unknown time. Immediately after, a blade aura as fast as light slashed toward Xiaofu's throat. Chapter 293. Lung Shiqi had personally experienced Yushu's trick of exchanging injury for death. Xiaofu's saber was stuck in Yushu's flesh, and he thought that he had won, so he lowered his guard a lot. Unfortunately, the more dangerous it was. Yushu's sudden attack was too fast for Xiaofu to react. Just as Yushu's blade was about to behead Xiaofu, Xiaofu's figure suddenly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he had appeared beside Elder Xiao. Elder Xiao said in a low voice, Xiaofu has lost this round. Xiaofu was still in a state of shock. If Elder Xiao hadn't stepped in to save him, he would have been dead by now. However, he didn't understand. He was stronger than Yushu in every aspect, so how did he lose? No. If this wasn't a bet but a fight to the death, he would already be dead. However, he still wasn't convinced. He still had a few powerful spirit techniques that he hadn't used, and he also had trump cards. These were all his methods to win. Elder Xiao's voice appeared in Xiaofu's mind, You're the one who's really arrogant. Now do you understand how terrifying the Blood Garment Pavilion disciples are? Their cultivation methods, spirit techniques, and spirit artifacts may not be as good as yours, but they've all climbed out of a pool of blood. Their battle experience and ability to choose between life and death far exceed yours. At the same time, his voice also reached the ears of the other three people, and their expressions all became serious. Although Yushu had won, Xiaofu's attack was very deep and almost cut off his right arm. At this moment he used his spirit energy to seal the wound, but he didn't leave. He raised his head and said, Who else? Lung Shiqi couldn't help but admire Yushu when he heard that. Yushu's taunt skill was really maxed out. As for the other three Lioha spiritual region disciples, their serious expressions were instantly replaced by anger. They had never been looked down upon like this before. When Elder Xiao saw this, he secretly sighed in his heart. The temperament of these few disciples was still a little lacking. Wuxiang quietly stood on his tiptoes at the side. He seemed to be in a good mood. Another youth with a jade crown on his head from the Six Direction spiritual region walked over and said, Six Direction spiritual region, Wanrui. You're already heavily injured. You're no match for me. Admit defeat. Yushu grinned and said, Even so, I can drag you down with me. Do you believe me? Wanrui appeared to be calmer than Xiaofu, but he was also quite arrogant. He shook his head and said, Stubborn? I only need one move to defeat you. He wasn't careless either. His hands became as translucent as jade, and with a slap of his palms, the force of 1,000 caddies came crashing down. Wanrui actually wanted to use force to suppress others. Lung Shiqi also felt that Wanrui's choice was correct. Yushu was already heavily injured, and there was no way he could defend himself. At this moment Yushu closed his eyes. In less than an instant he opened them again. Both of his eyes had turned pitch black, without the slightest bit of white in them. Black gas appeared on the blade in Yushu's left hand. He slashed out without any blade energy. Wanrui thought that Yushu had given up on resisting, but this seemingly ordinary slash strangely passed through Wanrui's arms and went straight for his head. Wanrui was shocked. His hands released bursts of jade-colored spirit light. His hands suddenly doubled in size and grabbed Yushu's blade. His hands were filled with great power, and he was actually able to squeeze Yushu's blade until it cracked. However, Wanrui couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Yushu wasn't lying. He really could drag him down with him. At the same time, Wanrui's other hand slammed down and a glaring jade light surged. At this moment, Yushu had used up all his strength and no longer had the ability to resist. He could only quickly shout, "I admit defeat." Wanrui's movements paused, but Yushu laughed sinisterly. "However, you used 2 moves, haha." Wanrui's face was as ugly as if he had eaten a fly. He did say that he could defeat Yushu in 1 move, but in the end he still used 2 moves. The people watching were either the higher-ups of both sides or the genius disciples. This made him feel a little embarrassed. Yushu walked back to Leng Shichi's side and secretly gave himself a thumbs up. Elder Mu flicked his finger and a ray of green light entered Yushu's right shoulder. The originally terrible wound quickly healed in a few breaths of time. Yushu immediately touched his wound in amazement. Then he immediately became lively again. He actually gave Wanrui a thumbs up and then gestured down a few times. Wanrui's eyes burned with anger when he saw this. He squeezed out a sentence through gritted teeth. The Blood Cloak Pavilion is one of the 7 absolutes, but its disciples are acting like this. What an eye-opener. However, the people of the Blood Cloak Pavilion were unmoved. The only one who moved was Xiongming. He walked forward without saying anything. A pair of black fist blades appeared on his arms and killing intent rose in his eyes. Next was the battle between Xiongming and Wanrui. Wanrui didn't dare to underestimate any of the Blood Cloak Pavilion disciples now. He sized up Xiongming. However, he suddenly realized that Xiongming was just standing in front of him, but he had a feeling that he was going to ignore Xiongming. This very strange feeling made him feel a little uncomfortable. He said, "What is your name, sir?" Xiongming didn't answer his question. His body flashed and his fist blades, which carried traces of demonic qi, arrived in front of Wanrui. When Wanrui saw Xiongming attack without even greeting him, he thought to himself, "The people of the Blood Cloak Pavilion are all crazy." However, he didn't slow down. His hands shone with layers of jade light, and he suddenly slapped out with a magnificent aura. With a ding, Xiongming's fist blades clashed with Wanrui's jade-like hands, producing a clanging sound. Xiongming's body moved again. He constantly moved around Wanrui, constantly looking for an opening. Wanrui, on the other hand, used defense as offense. He relied on the strength of his jade-like hands to deal with all kinds of changes. Xiongming was very fast, but Wanrui was strong enough to defeat all of them. Every time they clashed, Wanrui had a slight advantage. If this continued, Xiongming would probably be exhausted and defeated. However, Leng Shichi, Delta Origi, and Yushu weren't in a hurry. They all knew that among the 4 of them, Xiongming was the one who was best at hiding his strength. He probably had some kind of backup plan. After another attack, Xiongming was forced to retreat. This had happened several times already, and Wanrui was getting a little impatient. At that moment, an almost undetectable wisp of blood hidden in the demonic qi silently shot towards Wanrui. He only just noticed it when it was about to touch him. Leng Shichi was slightly surprised to see that wisp of blood. It was the Line Blood Heavenly Finger. Xiongming had also cultivated the Line Blood Heavenly Finger, and judging from the speed of the wisp of blood, he had already mastered the technique. This sudden wisp of blood caught Wanrui off guard. He reached out with one hand wanting to crush the wisp of blood. However, the most powerful thing about the Line Blood Heavenly Finger was its penetrative power. The wisp of blood pierced through his jade-like hands, but his jade-like hands had already dimmed. Wanrui secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, what he didn't know was that a cloud of demonic qi appeared behind him, and a figure emerged from it. Was Xiongming. Another Xiongming. Chapter 294. Another Ming had appeared behind Wanrui, but Wanrui didn't notice it at all. Leng Shichi was a little stunned as well because he couldn't tell which one was the real body of the infernal underworld. His eyes under the mask turned white, and he was able to tell that the Ming behind Wanrui was the real one. Wu Xiang muttered, "Ink Frost Ghostly being even taught the underworld ghost clone, Yushu learned the death intent strike, and Delta Origi learned the ghost bone ice fire sword. TSK, it seems like I'm the only one who didn't teach Leng Shichi anything." His voice wasn't loud, but he was close to Leng Shichi, so Leng Shichi heard what he said. Leng Shichi was speechless. The scene of the battle naturally fell into the eyes of the people from the 6 Unity spiritual region. They could only watch, but they could not say anything. Once they reminded Wanrui, it would mean that they had lost. Wanrui looked at the blood sky finger that had blocked a sliver of the blood sky finger, and then saw the infernal underworld stabbing towards him. Finally he stopped defending. He took a step forward and a powerful aura rushed toward him, blowing his hair. Yushu yelled, "Half-step spirit pulse realm." That's right, the aura Wan Rui was displaying was the aura of someone who had transformed their sea of qi into a spiritual sea. He only needed to open one more spirit pulse to reach the spirit pulse realm. So Wan Rui had been hiding something. Wan Rui clapped his hands and a violent wave of palm energy rushed out, shattering the Meng Ming in front of him into a cloud of black mist. Wan Rui paused for a moment, and then he felt a chill behind him. He turned around, and the other Meng Ming behind him was surrounded by demonic qi, which condensed into 8 spider-like demonic spikes that stabbed at his vital points. Wan Rui yelled and his body lit up with a faint jade glow, but he was too late. The demonic qi of the Meng Ming easily tore through his jade glow, and just as it was about to kill him, Wan Rui took out a jade stone from his mustard seed bracelet. At this moment Elder Xiao said, "We admit defeat." "Elder, I haven't lost yet." Wan Rui held the jade stone in his hand and said unwillingly, "Enough, come here." Wan Rui didn't dare to disobey Elder Xiao's words, so he could only leave the stage. This also meant that he had lost. But he felt that he hadn't lost. "Haven't you noticed that Hengming has been trying to get you used to his attack rhythm? He did it on purpose. From the beginning to the end, all of your reactions were under the control of others, but you were completely unaware of it. I'm very disappointed." Elder Xiao's words entered his mind, causing his entire body to tremble. In his battle with Meng Ming, he had indeed thought that Meng Ming was the kind of person who was skilled in movement techniques and flexible in his attacks. Indeed, he had slowly figured out Hengming's tactics. Initially, he thought that he would be able to win if he played it safe. However, Tong Ming's blood heavenly finger suddenly changed. For Wan Rui, the power of this move was not very strong, so he blocked it. But what he never expected was that the blood heavenly finger was only a means to attract his attention. It was all for the sake of unleashing the real killer move without anyone noticing, that strange shadow. Thinking of this, Wan Rui looked at Hengming with a trace of shock. His direct combat strength was much higher than Hengming's, and he also had trump cards that he hadn't used, but he had still lost. He had lost to Hengming's battle rhythm. At this moment, Hengming's face was deathly pale, and his body was slightly swaying. However, a trace of fear appeared in Wan Rui's heart. The Blood Robe Pavilion had won 2 battles in a row, which made the people of the 6th Direction spiritual region feel a little incredulous. Before coming, Xiao Fu and Wan Rui had come with the mentality that they would definitely win. Although the 6th Direction spiritual region and the Blood Robe Pavilion were both on the world sect ranking, they had never really taken the disciples of the Blood Robe Pavilion seriously. In fact, they even wanted to have fun on this trip. However, now that Xiao Fu and Wan Rui had been defeated in a row, it was equivalent to a slap in the face. Fortunately, this was an arena battle, not a one-on-one battle. As long as the final victor was one of their people, the 6th Direction spiritual region would still win. Therefore, the most important thing was still to see the battle between the Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators. After winning, Hengming didn't continue to stay like Yushu. Instead, he directly walked back. He knew that the next battle would be between the Spirit Pulse Realm cultivators, so there was no need for him to continue fighting. "I'll go first." At this moment, Delta Origi's voice sounded. Then she lightly stepped forward and stood upright. The remaining 2 people from the 6th Direction spiritual region were a man and a woman. They discussed in low voices for a moment, and the young girl also went up to fight. This young girl didn't use any spiritual power, but she gave off a lively feeling just by standing there. She said in a crisp voice, "Yun Meng Si." "Delta Origi." "Delta Origi? What a strange name." Yun Meng Si tilted her head slightly and muttered. Delta Origi couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with her. All the bones in her body creaked, and her hair turned silver white. Her aura then skyrocketed. Then she spun the bone sword in her hand and ignited layers of ghost fire. Netherworld chi spread out in all directions. Delta Origi didn't probe at all. She actually used such a powerful spiritual technique right from the start. Yun Meng Si's beautiful face changed slightly, but she didn't panic. Her hands flew like flowers, forming one spiritual seal after another. It was full of beauty. She was actually a spiritual caster. A spiritual caster of the Spirit Pulse realm. Spiritual casters would undergo a qualitative change after entering the 4 realms of the Sky realm. If they were compared to other cultivators of the same cultivation, their fighting strength would definitely be extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, dozens of wind blades suddenly appeared behind Yun Meng Si. On each wind blade, there was a strange mark that faintly flashed. The wind blades trembled slightly and emitted a wung sound. Then she lightly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and floated backwards. At the same time, the dozens of wind blades whistled out. The wind blades sliced through the air and emitted ear-piercing sounds. However, Delta Orgi turned a deaf ear to them. The bone sword in her hand waved out sword shadows, shattering the wind blades one after another. Then the ghost fire on her bone sword flourished. A faint death chi rose up and pervaded the surrounding area. She waved her arm and slashed out a glaring ghost fire sword beam. Yun Mengxi had been locking her fingers together. Around her, 3 differently colored spheres of light emerged, each releasing a different sense of power. One was as sharp as gold, one was as hot as fire, and one was as heavy as a mountain. Finally, they formed the gold, fire, and mountain imprints respectively. The mountain imprint lit up first. Immediately, a faint yellow light spread out and suppressed the death chi. Then the gold imprint flickered incessantly. Layers of gold light shields appeared in front of Yun Mengxi, blocking Delta Orgi's sword beam. Finally, the fire imprint trembled and fire arrows shot out one after another. However, Delta Orgi didn't dodge. The ghost fire and the flame collided and easily destroyed all the fire arrows. While Yun Mengxi was stunned, Delta Orgi had already approached her. In front of my ghost bone cold fire sword, ordinary flames don't deserve to exist. Delta Orgi stabbed out. It seemed like only one stab, but in fact she had stabbed out dozens of times in an instant. So many sword shadows overlapped, gathering an unimaginable power. Yun Mengxi's red lips slightly opened and said a strange word, "Na." Then the 3 imprints around her began to twist rhythmically. Gradually the 3 imprints merged into one. A terrifying wave of spiritual energy rippled out. A golden spear as heavy as Mount Tai and burning with raging flames appeared out of nowhere. Yun Mengxi actually held the spear in her hand and swept out. The surrounding 200 to 300 feet was instantly covered by a dense golden light. Waves of violent waves swept over everyone. Yushu and the other spirit transformation realm disciples turned pale and retreated. Elder Xiao and Wu Xiang both took action to protect their disciples. Leng Shiqi's eyes narrowed. Yun Mengxi's strength was indeed a little beyond his expectations. This was the true combat strength that the disciples of the 6th Direction Spiritual Zone should have. However, he wasn't worried about Delta Orgi at all. Because when the light dissipated, Delta Orgi's figure was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 295. When all the light dissipated, Delta Orgi's figure strangely disappeared. Yun Mengxi's heart tightened. Shortly after, wisps of will-o'-the-wisp sword light suddenly appeared above her head, forming a sword net that descended upon her. Yun Mengxi's expression finally changed. However, an exquisite bell appeared on her wrist. She shook it lightly and a crisp sound rang out. Layers of sound waves visible to the naked eye surged out, forming a semicircular spiritual shield. The sword net fell, and the ghost fire swords continuously cut at the spiritual shield, producing an extremely ear-piercing sound. The sound wave spiritual shield kept on twisting, but it still managed to forcibly take on the sword net. Yushu immediately shouted, "Cheating, she's cheating. There's something strange about this bell." If Yushu could see it, so could the others. When Yun Mengxi took out the bell, Leng Shiqi noticed that there was a spiritual technique sealed within the bell. In other words, the sound shield that protected Yun Mengxi just now wasn't her spiritual technique, but an ability that came with the bell. However, this couldn't be considered cheating. It could only be said that her spiritual tool was exquisite enough. At this moment, Delta Orgi's figure strangely appeared beside Yun Mengxi. Just as she was about to launch a sneak attack, Yun Mengxi smiled proudly. Leng Shiqi instantly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, a circular spiritual formation instantly appeared under Yun Mengxi's feet, and countless needle-like streams of water appeared. The streams of water swept out like a storm, as if they wanted to swallow Delta Orgi whole. Water countered fire. Yun Mengxi knew that Delta Orgi's ghost bone-chilling fire was incomparably powerful, so she used the endless streams of water to break it. Facing so many streams of water, even Delta Orgi couldn't dodge. Since she couldn't dodge, then she wouldn't dodge. A bloodline quietly appeared on Delta Orgi's blade. That was the spiritual technique that came with the Seven Fiends art, Carnage Blood. As soon as the bloodline appeared, the ghost fire was instantly dyed into blood flames. Blood flames appeared in the world, and blood fiendish energy spread out. Delta Orgi stabbed out with her sword, and in a split second, blood energy soared into the sky, almost wiping out all the water currents. However, there was still a lapse in concentration, and several streams of water still pierced her body. Fortunately, the impact was not great. Up until now, both Delta Orgi and Yun Mengxi had used their trump cards one after another, but neither side could do anything to the other. If they continued to fight like this, they would only be able to compete in terms of spiritual power. Perhaps Yun Mengxi's cultivation method was slightly better than Delta Origi's, but Delta Origi's cultivation was indeed at the peak of the first level of Spirit Pulse realm. Therefore their powers were almost the same. How long would that take? Moreover, there was still a battle coming up. If they could preserve some of their spiritual energy, they might be able to exhaust a portion of their opponent's spiritual energy. At this moment, both of them had the same thought, and that was to decide the outcome of the battle with one move. Delta Origi's originally thin body suddenly became even more delicate, but her aura had already reached the second level of the Spirit Pulse realm. Blood flames rose around her body as her fighting spirit soared higher and higher. A mystical imprint appeared on Yun Mengxi's forehead, and boundless spiritual power surged continuously. She quickly formed hand seals, and every time she formed a spiritual seal, a few streams of light would gather above her head. Gradually, the shadow of a small palace appeared there. Both of them were accumulating power and waiting to attack. The first to move was still Delta Origi. Her bone sword trembled and let out a hiss. The dense blood-fiendish energy and blood flames fused together, and suddenly, a blood-colored sword light slashed out like a waterfall. Yun Mengxi pushed her hands forward, and the shadow of the palace in midair let out a pleasant sound. That sound contained an invisible power, and instantly dispersed a portion of the blood-fiendish energy. Then, the shadow of the palace bloomed with a boundless light, and a sound that didn't seem to belong to the mortal world came out. That sound seemed to come from the ancient times, and it shook the heavens and earth, suppressing everything. Delta Origi's blood-colored waterfall was actually shaken to the point that it almost dissipated from the illusory sound of the blade. Then Delta Origi suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. She wasn't injured, but she spat it out on her own accord. That was her blood essence. The blood all fell onto the bone sword, and suddenly, a ferocious blood aura rose into the air. The blood-colored waterfall expanded by a large amount, and tore the shadow of the palace apart. The blood-colored waterfall didn't lose its momentum, and it slashed towards Yun Mengxi. However, an arm suddenly appeared from the shadow of the palace. It waved lightly, and the huge blood-colored waterfall instantly shattered like a bubble. Delta Origi was hit by the blood essence backlash, and she spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Her body returned to its original state, but she swayed and almost fainted. At this time a figure held her shoulder and she didn't fall. While Yushu shouted angrily, "Do you still want your face?" That arm clearly didn't belong to her. What Yushu said could be seen by everyone present. The power emitted by that arm had far surpassed the power of a spiritual pulse realm cultivator, and even the power of a spiritual aperture realm cultivator. That definitely wasn't Yun Mengxi's own power. If Yun Mengxi really had such power, the Blood Robe Pavilion would have just admitted defeat. What was the point of fighting? Before this, Yun Mengxi had used that bell, which was more or less acceptable. But this time it was true that he had cheated. The 5 Sky Origin Realm cultivators of the Blood Robe Pavilion, including Wu Xiang, all took a step forward. They didn't say anything, but their meaning was obvious. Elder Shao also sighed helplessly. Yun Mengxi is a genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. It's normal for her to have some tricks up her sleeve to protect her. It's just that I didn't think that she would be forced out in the middle of the battle. Why don't we call it a draw? A draw. If that arm hadn't appeared, Delta Origi would have already won. Why would they call it a draw? The people of the Blood Robe Pavilion were naturally unwilling. Pavilion Master Hateful Blade said, "You and I are both in the Sky Origin realm. Can't you see the direction of the battle?" Delta Origi won. Elder Shao shook his head and said, "That might not be the case. Yun Mengxi is also proficient in several spiritual formations, which can be activated in an instant. Even if there were no external objects to stop her, she wouldn't have lost. Therefore, a draw is the best result." Elder Shao wants to fight on paper? Hateful Blade's words had a hint of sarcasm. Elder Shao was actually feeling very bitter. They were indeed in the wrong, but if Yun Mengxi lost, their 6th-direction spiritual region would have lost 3 matches in a row. Even if they won the last match, it would be hard to explain when they returned. However, at this moment, Leng Shichi, who was supporting Delta Origi, said something that shocked everyone. Delta Origi lost this match. What? Yushu exclaimed. Xiongming also looked at Leng Shichi in surprise. Even the disciples of the 6th-direction spiritual region had expressions of disbelief. However, Leng Shichi looked at Yun Mengxi with a hint of murderous intent in his eyes. Chapter 296. The reason why Leng Shichi said this was because regardless of whether it was a draw or a win for Gu San, Yun Mengxi would still participate. Leng Shiqi didn't want her to step down. Delta Origi sensed Leng Shiqi's murderous intent and said, "I admit defeat." This. Yushu and the others looked at each other. Yun Mengxi was obviously cheating, but they couldn't say that Delta Origi would win. Therefore, it wasn't unacceptable for this battle to be considered a draw. However, Delta Origi admitted defeat, which confused Yushu and Hengming. As for Hateful Blade and the others, they remained silent. Since Delta Origi admitted defeat, they could only accept it silently. Formless crossed his arms and looked like he was waiting to watch a good show. Leng Shiqi whispered to Delta Origi, "Go and rest. Leave the rest to me." Delta Origi didn't force herself this time and nodded obediently. After Delta Origi left, Leng Shiqi's eyes turned colder and colder. He said, "I am Leng Shiqi. Please enlighten me." Yun Mengxi also thought that it would be best for her and Delta Origi to end up in a draw. She wasn't confident that she could defeat Delta Origi, but she also didn't think that she would lose. Therefore, when Delta Origi admitted defeat, she couldn't help but be stunned. What surprised her more was that Leng Shiqi made this decision for Delta Origi. Delta Origi actually did this. What was their purpose in doing this? Yun Mengxi couldn't figure it out. However, when she saw Leng Shiqi's ice-cold gaze, she felt a chill in her heart that went straight to her soul. She vaguely understood what was going on. Leng Shiqi didn't hesitate at all. He raised his right arm and 36 demonic patterns appeared. After the spiritual pulse realm, one could condense 9 demonic patterns every time they broke through a realm. The 36 demonic patterns made Leng Shiqi feel like his arm was filled with explosive power. He stretched out his 5 fingers and his palm turned into a pitch-black demonic claw. In an instant, demonic aura rose around him and a demonic claw half the height of a human formed. Earth Fiend Demonic Claw. Yun Mengxi didn't dare to be distracted. She quickly formed a hand seal, and as her spirit energy flashed, flames and golden light flashed. The demonic claw tore the flames and shattered the golden light, but it also dissipated into nothingness. Leng Shiqi was also a spirit caster, so he naturally knew the weakness of spirit casters, which was that there was a short buffer period between spirit techniques. The reason he used the Earth Fiend Demon Shadow Claw was not to injure Yun Mengxi in the first place. Instead, it was to take advantage of this momentary gap. Before the claw shadow completely dissipated, Leng Shiqi punched out. The shadow of a ferocious tiger suddenly jumped out and pounced forward. Yun Mengxi didn't expect Leng Shiqi to attack so quickly. She didn't have time to form a hand seal. Mental energy surged between her eyebrows, and a green formation suddenly appeared in front of her. Layers upon layers of green light intertwined, like the roots of a towering tree overlapping with each other. The green light blocked the shadow of the tiger, but the internal energy within it went through the green light and attacked Yun Mengxi. Yun Mengxi immediately felt a huge force coming at her, but her clothes flashed with spirit light to dissolve the internal energy. She only took a few steps back. What shocked her was that Leng Shiqi had appeared beside her without her noticing. Leng Shiqi used his palm as a knife. In an instant, hundreds of knife auras shot out, killing everything in their path. Yun Mengxi still didn't have time to form a hand seal. She spat out another word. Boom. Something strange happened. The air seemed to vibrate rhythmically, shattering the knife auras one after another. Leng Shiqi's 3 consecutive attacks didn't yield any obvious results. The other 3 disciples of the Lioha spiritual zone smiled. Only Elder Xiao frowned more and more. In fact, Leng Shiqi was also a little surprised. Yun Mengxi was proficient in the spirit seal style, the spirit incantation style, and the spirit formation style. She was indeed a rare genius. But she had to pay the price today. Yun Mengxi had just shattered the knife auras when another 5 bloodlines shot out. Each bloodline was condensed to the extreme and aimed at her fatal spots. This was also the Blood Heavenly Finger, but it was performed by a Spirit Pulse Level 3 cultivator. It was the Blood Heavenly Finger of the perfection stage. Ah! Yun Mengxi suddenly screamed in the face of danger. Violent mental energy surged out. At this moment, she had no choice but to overdraw her mental energy. She didn't form a hand seal this time. Instead, the shadow of the palace appeared in the air again. But what she didn't know was that Leng Shiqi had been waiting for this moment. Leng Shiqi's eyes flickered with a strange light. One of his eyes was enough to shake people's hearts and souls. The other eye looked lifeless, but it contained the terror of life and death. He performed the soul-scaring technique and the mind-stealing technique at the same time. Originally, this level 3 illusory technique was almost useless against a spirit pulse realm cultivator like Yun Mengxi. But Yun Mingxi had already exhausted a lot of her mental energy in the fierce battle with the Delta Origi. Now Leng Shiqi was forcing her to overdraw her mental energy. This way, although she could explode with powerful mental energy for a short period of time, she wouldn't be able to resist the illusory technique. The shadow of the palace above Yun Mingxi's head had just taken shape, but it suddenly disappeared. Even Yun Mingxi herself stood there in a daze, motionless. Leng Shiqi formed a sword with his fingers. Dozens of invisible channel unblocking sword auras shot out and pierced into Yun Mingxi's body mercilessly. Not only did the channel unblocking sword auras leave wounds all over her body, but they also caused blood vessels to appear all over her body. More than half of the meridians in her body were sealed. This time she was really in a situation where she was bound to lose. Seeing this scene, Elder Xiao sighed inwardly. However, it was already very good that Yun Mingxi could hold on until now. On the other hand, the other three people had yet to recover from Yun Mingxi's sudden defeat. Just a moment ago the two of them were still fighting back and forth. Seeing that Yun Mingxi was about to explode, she suddenly froze. They had all subconsciously thought that Leng Shiqi was a martial artist, so they had overlooked the possibility of an illusory technique. However, to everyone's surprise, Leng Shiqi did not stop there. His eyes suddenly shone with a terrifying murderous intent. He struck out 6 palms and the 6 palms combined into one. Instantly, a huge palm of demonic flames came crashing down. There was only one ending for a defenseless martial artist when faced with such a palm, and that was death. Elder Xiao was immediately enraged. How dare you? Just as he was about to intervene, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. It was Hateful Blade. Elder Xiao, the battle is not over yet. If you intervene, it will be equivalent to admitting defeat. Hateful Blade's sudden appearance shocked Elder Xiao. He said in a low voice, I admit defeat on behalf of Yun Mingxi. Bang! However, Leng Shiqi's 6 solar poisonous fire palms still struck Yun Mingxi's body. The boundless power of the palm and the sinister demonic flames engulfed her. Fortunately, she finally regained some consciousness at the last moment. Spiritual light flashed on her clothes continuously and blocked a portion of the power of the palm. Even so, she was still sent flying. Furthermore, the poisonous fire attacked her heart and she immediately spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. The scorching flames burned her clothes and seared her hair. She was in a pitiful state. After falling to the ground, she immediately fainted. At this moment, Leng Shiqi suddenly slapped his head regretfully and said, Oh no, Elder Xiao was a little slow. I did not stop in time. Chapter 297. Elder Xiao's face was completely gloomy. He shouted in a low voice, Is the Blood Garment Pavilion trying to ruin the bet this time? The threat in his words was obvious. If Hen Dao hadn't stopped him just now, he could have saved Yun Mingxi at any time. It was obvious that Hen Dao's actions were intentional. However, Hen Dao said, The disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion have always followed the rules in the competition. Yun Mingxi didn't admit defeat, so Leng Shiqi continued to attack. No matter how you look at it, we are in the right. Elder Xiao shook his head secretly. This was back to the matter of Yun Mingxi being forced to use her protective trump card. The 6th-direction spiritual region was indeed in the wrong, and because of this, the Delta Origi was seriously injured. However, he was the one who brought Yun Mingxi here. Now that she was in such a state, it would be difficult for him to report back. At this time, Wu Xiang cursed at Leng Shiqi, You little bastard, how dare you be so heavy-handed to a disciple of the 6th-direction spiritual region? She's a girl, why don't you know how to be gentle with her? His voice was very loud, but there was no hint of blame in his tone. Leng Shiqi also said very cooperatively, Elder Xiao, fellow disciples of the 6th-direction spiritual region, I'm not good enough and didn't stop for a moment. Please forgive me. Elder Xiao knew that the Blood Garment Pavilion was giving him a way out. He also knew that the 6th-direction spiritual region and the Blood Garment Pavilion joining forces was the region master's idea. As an elder, he actually didn't have much authority. In the end, he could only use silence to cover this matter. He didn't pay any attention to Leng Shiqi. Instead, he helped Yun Mingxi up and fed her a pill. Miraculously, Yun Mingxi woke up in an instant, and the fire poison in her body was also cleansed. After Yun Mingxi woke up, the first thing she looked at was Leng Shiqi, and the expression in her eyes was unusually complicated. Leng Shiqi didn't look at Yun Mingxi. Instead, he looked at the last youth. He was the person from the 6th-direction spiritual region who hadn't made a move yet. As long as they defeated him, the Blood Garment Pavilion would win. This youth had a strong physique and a resolute face. His body was full of vitality, and it was obvious that he had also cultivated a body-refining technique. He walked over with a crimson spear in hand, his battle intent surging. Lung Shiqi's expression froze. He could feel that this was a formidable opponent. 6th Direction Spiritual Region, Gongye Mingshu. As Gongye Mingshu stood there, his entire body seemed to have fused with the long spear. He didn't make any movements, but he gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. As Lung Shiqi had exposed many of his moves during the fight with Yun Mengxi just now, he decided to observe the situation and test Gongye Mingshu's actual strength first. Gongye Mingshu didn't hold back as well. He shook the spear in his hand, and there were actually traces of lightning flowing on it. After that, the lightning spear suddenly whipped over like a whip. Although this spear technique was a spear technique, there seemed to be a hint of a staff technique within it. It was extremely ferocious. Lung Shiqi took a deep breath. Using the spirit steps, he flew backward quickly, and at the same time, he unleashed a few frost sword energies to neutralize the wind generated by the spear. Bang! Gongye Mingshu stomped on the ground with one foot, and his body shot out like a sharp arrow that had left the bow. He thrust his spear forward, and the body of the spear blossomed with a crimson light. It smashed down from the sky like a red sun, and its imposing manner was extremely shocking. Lung Shiqi didn't dodge this time. The astral wood spirit spear appeared in his hand as well. Then, his eyes widened slightly, and his entire body emitted an imposing manner of charging into enemy lines alone. Charging into enemy lines would only lead to death. He thrust his spear forward like Gongye Mingshu, but the difference was that the tip of his spear drew out a huge cross of spirit light. The crimson sun was cut apart by the cross of spirit light, and the tips of the two spears collided with each other accurately. Instantly, an ear-piercing sound of collision was heard. Then, an invisible force spread out from the tip of the spear, and it stirred up gusts of wind. Lung Shiqi immediately felt an enormous force pass from the body of the spear to his arm, and it shook him to the point that the web between his thumb and forefinger cracked, and his arm went numb. The strength of Gongye Mingshu's body was actually stronger than his. On the other hand, Gongye Mingshu retreated 2 steps, and he was even more shocked in his heart. After this attack, he could feel that his body was stronger than Lung Shiqi's, and his spirit spear was better than Lung Shiqi's. His spirit techniques weren't inferior to Lung Shiqi's either. However, while he retreated 2 steps, Lung Shiqi didn't retreat. He was actually at a disadvantage in this attack. He found it hard to understand. He also somewhat understood the difficulties of Xiao Fu and Wan Rui. However, Elder Xiao saw through the reason behind this. It was because Lung Shiqi's spear thrust was filled with the will to die, and Gongye Mingshu had always treated this as a competition. Unknowingly, his imposing manner had already fallen to a disadvantage. Not only him but the 3 people from before were also the same. However, Elder Xiao didn't have any intention of blaming them. He also knew that this had always been the drawback of the Lioha spiritual region's disciples. In fact, their disciples didn't lack battle experience, and they would often spar and compete with each other. However, the Blood Clothing Pavilion's disciples had all climbed out of a sea of blood and piles of corpses. Facing such an opponent, Gongye Mingshu and the others' biggest weakness was that they didn't have the experience of fighting with their lives on the line. When Wu Xiang saw Lung Shiqi's spear, he muttered with satisfaction, "He's improved a little." After his attack failed, Gongye Mingshu let out a low roar and began a frenzied attack. Every thrust of his spear was wide open, and the spear was filled with flames and traces of lightning. Its power was astonishing. In the blink of an eye, Lung Shiqi was forced to retreat again and again. Under the sky full of spear shadows, Lung Shiqi was like a small boat in a huge wave, and could capsize at any time. Lung Shiqi naturally couldn't continue like this. Then he unsheathed his inky jade sword, and his sword swept out like a river. Streaks of dark green sword light and spear shadows constantly clashed, and countless sparks were created. It was even more dazzling. All of a sudden, Lung Shiqi's sword style changed. It became soft and gentle like a gentle breeze brushing the willows. The 2 completely opposite sword styles were instantly switched in his hands, causing Gongye Mingshu, who had already adapted to Lung Shiqi's attack rhythm, to have an unusual feeling of suffocation. However, his reaction wasn't slow either. His spear style also changed and became like a long whip. However, Lung Shiqi's sword style changed again. Sometimes it was fierce, sometimes it was light, sometimes it was as fast as a rainbow, and sometimes it was as slow as a willow catkin. This was the great perfection of the 17 sword styles of Mount Song, and it was vividly displayed by Lung Shiqi with his 5th level spirit sword. The constantly changing sword style made Gongye Mingshu a little overwhelmed. Although he was also good at different spear styles, he certainly couldn't be as free and flexible as Leng Shiqi when switching between styles. Gradually, Leng Shiqi suppressed Gongye Mingshu. Gongye Mingshu knew that he couldn't continue like this. He swatted away Leng Shiqi's inky jade sword with his spear. Then, his expression turned serious, and he formed a mystical spirit seal with one hand. What was even stranger was that the spirit seal was actually imprinted on his own body. Immediately, blazing flames and tyrannical lightning surged around Gongye Mingshu's body. He stood there safe and sound like a Balrog or thunder god. Chapter 298. Gongye Mingshu suddenly erupted with such a powerful aura, causing everyone to be slightly shocked. Xiao Fu said coldly, that Leng Shiqi can force senior brother Gongye to use the Crimson Thunder insight. He's quite capable, but that's it. Wan Ruei added, that's right. Senior brother Gongye's cultivation is comparable to the middle stage of the spiritual pulse realm. Leng Shiqi will definitely lose. Only Yun Mengxi didn't speak. She knew that Leng Shiqi could use illusions to temporarily control her, a spirit caster. It was obvious that Leng Shiqi's mental strength was extremely powerful. Moreover, he was also good at illusions. She had to be careful. Unfortunately, before Gongye Mingshu stepped forward, she hadn't completely woken up and forgot to remind him. If she said it now, it would be considered cheating again. Leng Shiqi's mind moved, and his body was instantly covered in a set of ferocious armor that looked like a giant demon. His aura suddenly soared to the middle stage of the spiritual pulse realm. He swung the black jade sword horizontally, and 36 demonic patterns appeared. A sword ray that combined the intent of sharpness and heaviness flashed past in an instant. Other than Wu Xiang and Delta Origi, everyone else showed varying degrees of surprise. Xiao Fu and Wan Ruei both widened their eyes. Leng Shiqi's current state was even stronger than Gongye Mingshu's. They had just said that this wave was in the bag, and in the blink of an eye, such an unforeseen event had occurred. While they were shocked, they also felt ashamed to the point of being unable to show their faces. Yun Mengxi's eyes were not only filled with surprise, but also a bit of fear. If Leng Shiqi used this move during the battle with her, she would have lost long ago. Even a few Sky Origin Realm experts stared at Leng Shiqi's demonic beast blood rune armor, as if they wanted to figure it out. Old Blockhead transmitted his voice to Old Bones. Can you see anything mysterious about it? Wonderful. It contains blood chi, demonic chi, and demonic chi. How did he fuse these three completely different types of power together? There's the aura of the Bloody Slaughter 7 Fiend art here. Did this kid change the Bloody Slaughter 7 Fiend art? Very likely. This child is truly a genius. Our decision to let him live was correct. Meng Ming clenched his fists tightly. No one knew what he was thinking. As for Yushu, his mouth was wide open and his saliva was almost flowing out. He said, so handsome. At this moment, a hint of worry appeared in Elder Xiao's eyes for the first time. On the other hand, Gongye Mingshu was the calmest of them all, because all of his thoughts were focused on how to defeat Leng Shiqi. Gongye Mingshu's figure moved. Intense flames and tyrannical thunderbolts soared into the sky before abruptly smashing down. Leng Shiqi swung his black jade sword, and more than 200 blue frosty sword chi surged in the sky, destroying the soaring flames and lightning. At the same time, a penetrating cold air and an incomparably hot wave of fire gushed out from his body at the same time. Ice and fire were two substances that naturally countered each other. But at this moment in Leng Shiqi's hands, they actually fused together perfectly. The cold air and the flames intertwined together like a small tornado whistling out. In the 10 days before the battle, Leng Shiqi did not waste his time. His greatest gain was that under Wu Xiang's guidance he was able to fuse Spirit Assault, Path of Ice and Spirit Assault, Bombardment of Flames together. It became a fire and ice tornado that was comparable to a 5th-level spiritual skill. Seeing this scene, Wu Xiang smiled proudly. When some people smiled, of course there were also people who wanted to cry, such as Gongye Mingshu. How could he have expected that Leng Shiqi was such a powerful spiritual caster? Although the sudden loss of the Dream Cloud Silk had made him suspicious, he had never thought in this direction. But Gongye Mingshu was also stimulated with a trace of ruthlessness. His body suddenly arched strangely, but it looked strangely beautiful, as if all the muscles and strength in his body had been adjusted to a perfect state. Then, the flames and lightning around his body twisted and turned, gradually forming the shape of a dragon. And the spear was the dragon's head. Gongye Mingshu's body suddenly pounced, turning into a large dragon and red lightning, and directly collided with the fire and ice tornado. With a loud boom, huge airwaves exploded with flames, cold air, and thunderbolts. The area within a radius of dozens of meters was turned into a mess. The experts of the Blood Clothing Pavilion and Lioha Spiritual Region all retreated with their disciples. The flames dissipated, and a broken dragon appeared. The dragon spat out a spear tip that shone with dense spiritual light, and it instantly pierced through Leng Shiqi's figure. We won. Oh no. The disciples of both sides had completely opposite thoughts. However, Gongye Mingshu was stunned because he did not feel his body being pierced. In other words, the Leng Shiqi in front of him was a fake. Sure enough, Leng Shiqi's body suddenly burst like a bubble, and turned into gorgeous petals that gently fluttered. Gongye Mingshu looked up vigilantly. Unknowingly, countless petals were sprinkling down from the sky around him. It was like a rain of petals, beautiful and magnificent. At this moment, Gongye Mingshu was about to be intoxicated by this beautiful world of flowers, but he suddenly bit his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was shocked and said in his heart, "I was almost pulled into an illusion." Then the countless petals rapidly spun, and then shot towards Gongye Mingshu. Each petal was actually a sword chi. However, there were real and fake sword chi and it was impossible to guard against. Gongye Mingshu held his spear horizontally above his head, and all the spiritual energy in his body converged on the spear. Suddenly, flames rose and lightning flashed. He wanted to use force to break the technique. However, when his attention was completely focused on the sky, dozens of Leng Shiqi suddenly appeared, and dozens of violent sword chi engulfed Gongye Mingshu. Gongye Mingshu turned pale with fright. Facing the sword chi that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, he felt a trace of the threat of death for the first time. This made him want to use his life-saving trump card, but if he did that, he would be able to resolve the current crisis, but he would also lose. At this moment, a huge palm blotted out the sky and instantly destroyed all the sword chi, and the sky was completely swept clean. It was Elder Shao. This time, Hateful Blade did not stop him. Because if Elder Shao made a move, it meant that Gongye Mingshu had lost. At the same time, it also meant that the Sixth Direction Spiritual Region had lost. Gongye Mingshu's face was gloomy. As one of the most outstanding disciples of the Sixth Direction Spiritual Region, he naturally had some pride in his heart. However, he had lost just like that, and he had lost in such a straightforward manner. What made him feel strange was that all the sword chi as well as the illusions had disappeared. Where had the Leng Shiqi gone? At this moment, a voice came from beneath Gongye Mingshu's feet. Let's consider this my win. Chapter 299. 3 days later, Leng Shiqi finished refining the 9-melody spirit fusion pill given to him by the Pavilion Master. His cultivation had soared to the 5th level of the spiritual pulse realm. As long as his cultivation was high, the power of his spiritual skills would naturally increase. At this moment there was a knock on the door. Master Wu Xiang wants to see you. Got it. Leng Shiqi then stretched his muscles and bones. After cultivating for 3 days his body was slightly stiff. After a short while, Leng Shiqi came to Wu Xiang's place. When Wu Xiang saw Leng Shiqi's 5th level of the spiritual pulse realm, he did not say anything. It was as if everything was within his expectations. Wu Xiang waved his hand and sprinkled a green light that enveloped the entire hall. Leng Shiqi felt that this should be some kind of isolation restriction. However, he was a little surprised that Wu Xiang Palace had to use such a method in the Blood Garment Pavilion. Then what Wu Xiang was going to say next must be of great importance. Wu Xiang also put away his unreliable appearance and said solemnly, Leng Shiqi, what I'm going to say next is of great importance. Besides you and me, only the Pavilion Master knows about this. In this world, I don't want a fourth person to know about this. Leng Shiqi's heart trembled. What was it that even the 2 Pavilion Masters, the Deputy Pavilion Master and the Disciplinary Elder could not know about it? He said solemnly, I'll keep that in mind. 3 days ago you defeated the 6th Direction Spiritual Region in a battle. At the same time, the Blood Garment Pavilion also received the support of the 6th Direction Spiritual Region. Then, the next step of the plan can be carried out. That is the Blood Seed Plan after the Blood Fog Island Plan. Blood Seed Plan? Leng Shiqi was confused, but he did not ask any questions. Wu Xiang continued, the Blood Seed Plan was originally expected to start in a few years. However, you and Delta Origi have broken through to the spiritual pulse realm one after another and have the ability to protect yourself, so the Blood Seed Plan started in advance. This plan is also an extremely important part of changing the future of the Blood Garment Pavilion. You are the first seed. Do you still remember that I once said that the Blood Garment Pavilion didn't nurture the 4 of you to be assassins? If it was just this, it would never be able to change the situation of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Take a look at this. At this point, Wuxiang suddenly took out a huge box from his mustard seed bag. That box was more than half a zhang long and half a zhang tall. What is this? Leng Shiqi asked curiously. Wuxiang said, "You can open it and take a look." Leng Shiqi opened the box. There was a faint musty smell as if the things inside had been there for a long time. When he opened it, all he saw was a bunch of messy things. This included rattles, strange black rods, children's tattered clothes. There were even a few spiritual artifacts and techniques. Could be said that everything was there. However, these things were all very old. On one side of the box there were several stacks of thick books. Some were old, some were new, and the newest one seemed to have been bound not long ago. Seeing these things, Leng Shiqi was even more confused. What are these? At this moment, Wuxiang's voice sounded, "These are all your things." Leng Shiqi said in surprise, "What? My things?" His mind raced. He suddenly remembered that he had no memory of this body before he was 10 years old. Could these things be related to the original owner of this body? Wuxiang's tone changed again. To be precise, these are the things of the other you. They are also the traces of the other you being alive. The other me? Leng Shiqi seemed to have vaguely grasped something. He seemed to have experienced this scene before. He remembered. Before he entered the illusory spirit's secret realm, Feng Shamo had found him and said that he would arrange a new identity for him, which was the identity of Zhuqiu. At that time, Feng Shamo had given him some things to hide his identity, including Zhuqiu's life records. He could not help but think to himself, is Wu Xiang or the Blood Garment Pavilion also arranging a new identity for me? From today onwards, you are not only the Blood Garment assassin of the Blood Garment Pavilion, Leng Shiqi. You are no longer just an assassin. You will appear in the world with another identity. We call it birth. Wu Xiang's words confirmed Leng Shiqi's thoughts. He thought to himself that it was indeed so. The sect has already prepared a perfect identity for you. No matter who comes to investigate you, they will not reveal any flaws. Now you have a choice. After you birth, it is best to join two forces. It can also be said that you are two completely different branches of the same force. That is, the Discipline Commission and the Dark Thunder Guards. Discipline Commission, Dark Thunder Guards. Leng Shiqi was shocked. Of course he knew these two names. He had even killed Chu Xinran, who was a Dark Thunder Guard. Regardless of whether it was the Discipline Commission or the Dark Thunder Guards, they were directly under the jurisdiction of the Thunderblaze dynasty's royal family. However, they were mainly responsible for different things. The Discipline Commission was like the Thunderblaze dynasty's claws and teeth. It was responsible for handling the conflicts between the dynasty's forces and the spirit cultivator sections. Discipline meant that if they could suppress it, then they would suppress it. If they could not suppress it, then they would appease it. However, the authority of the discipline department differed greatly from province to province. For example, in the Muqin County and Donglin County, where there were top forces, the Discipline Commission existed in name only. This was because they did not have the ability to suppress the Blood Robe Pavilion or the Mountain Sea sect. However, in other counties they might have monstrous authority and power. As for the people of the Discipline Commission, they had never been liked by the people of the leading sections. Even rogue cultivators looked down on them. Their reputation was extremely bad. As for the Dark Thunder Guards, they were the hidden fangs of the Thunderblaze dynasty. The fundamental purpose of the Dark Thunder Guards was to eliminate all people, things, and things that affected the stability of the dynasty. From supervising the royal family, civil and military officials, to eliminating spirit cultivators who caused trouble, they were all under their jurisdiction. For example, Xuanhuan was secretly investigated by the Dark Thunder Guards and found evidence of him secretly manufacturing weapons, leading to the execution of Xuanhuan's entire family. For example, the black-veiled woman that Leng Shiqi met in the illusory spirit secret realm was to investigate the 5 devil cultivators who caused trouble. No matter where the Dark Thunder Guards were, they had a lot of power. Even the lowest level Dark Thunder Guards had the right to act at their own discretion. That meant that they could ignore the laws of the Thunderblaze dynasty and directly act first and report later. Therefore, the Dark Thunder Guards were hated by the people of the dynasty. And now Wuxiang actually asked Leng Shiqi to choose one of them. Leng Shiqi had already vaguely guessed what the Blood Robe Pavilion wanted to do. They were clearly asking him to be a spy. However, the Discipline Commission had become enemies with the spirit cultivators of the world. The Dark Thunder Guards were hated by the various forces of the dynasty. Neither of these were good places to go. If he had to choose between the two, Leng Shiqi hesitated for a moment, but he was still more willing to choose the Dark Thunder Guards. Perhaps it was because he was used to walking in the dark that he would be more proficient in doing things in the dark. Moreover, the Dark Thunder Guards had the right to act at their own discretion, which also gave him some initiative. Thus he said, "Disciple is willing to go to the Dark Thunder Guards." Wuxiang nodded and said, "Yes, I will arrange this matter for you as soon as possible. Take these things back and take a good look. Be sure to memorize every word and sentence." Disciple understands. Leng Shiqi cupped his hands and said. Then he casually opened a page of the book, but there was a name that he would never have dreamed of, Lu Xingji. Chapter 300. 3 days later, Leng Shiqi finished refining the 9-melody spirit fusion pill given to him by the pavilion master. His cultivation had soared to the 5th level of the spiritual pulse realm. As long as his cultivation was high, the power of his spiritual skills would naturally increase. At this moment there was a knock on the door. Master Wuxiang wants to see you." "Got it." Leng Shiqi then stretched his muscles and bones. After cultivating for 3 days his body was slightly stiff. After a short while, Leng Shiqi came to Wuxiang's place. When Wuxiang saw Leng Shiqi's 5th level of the spiritual pulse realm, he did not say anything. It was as if everything was within his expectations. Wuxiang waved his hand and sprinkled a green light that enveloped the entire hall. Leng Shiqi felt that this should be some kind of isolation restriction. However, he was a little surprised that Wuxiang Palace had to use such a method in the Blood Garment Pavilion. Then what Wuxiang was going to say next must be of great importance. Wuxiang also put away his unreliable appearance and said solemnly, "Leng Shiqi, what I'm going to say next is of great importance. Besides you and me, only the pavilion master knows about this. In this world, I don't want a 4th person to know about this." Leng Shiqi's heart trembled. What was it that even the 2 pavilion masters, the deputy pavilion master and the disciplinary elder, could not know about it? He said solemnly, "I'll keep that in mind. 3 days ago you defeated the 6th direction spiritual region in a battle. At the same time, the Blood Garment Pavilion also received the support of the 6th direction spiritual region. Then, the next step of the plan can be carried out. That is the Blood Seed plan after the Blood Fog Island plan." Blood Seed plan? Leng Shiqi was confused, but he did not ask any questions. Wuxiang continued, "The Blood Seed plan was originally expected to start in a few years. However, you and Delta Origi have broken through to the spiritual pulse realm one after another and have the ability to protect yourself, so the Blood Seed plan started in advance. This plan is also an extremely important part of changing the future of the Blood Garment Pavilion. You are the first seed. Do you still remember that I once said that the Blood Garment Pavilion didn't nurture the 4 of you to be assassins? If it was just this, it would never be able to change the situation of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Take a look at this." At this point, Wuxiang suddenly took out a huge box from his mustard seed bag. That box was more than half a zhang long and half a zhang tall. "What is this?" Leng Shiqi asked curiously. Wuxiang said, "You can open it and take a look." Leng Shiqi opened the box. There was a faint musty smell, as if the things inside had been there for a long time. When he opened it, all he saw was a bunch of messy things. This included rattles, strange black rods, children's tattered clothes. There were even a few spiritual artifacts and techniques. Could be said that everything was there. However, these things were all very old. On one side of the box there were several stacks of thick books. Some were old, some were new, and the newest one seemed to have been bound not long ago. Seeing these things, Leng Shiqi was even more confused. "What are these?" At this time Wuxiang's voice sounded. "These are all your things." Leng Shiqi was surprised. "What? My things?" His mind raced. He suddenly remembered that he had no memory of this body before he was 10 years old. Could these things be related to the original owner of this body? Wuxiang's tone changed again. "To be precise, these are the things of the other you. They are also the traces of the other you being alive." "The other me?" Leng Shiqi seemed to have vaguely grasped something. He seemed to have experienced this scene before. He remembered. Before he entered the illusory spirit's secret realm, Feng Shamo had found him and said that he would arrange a new identity for him, which was the identity of Zhuqiu. At that time, Feng Shamo had given him some things to hide his identity, including Zhuqiu's life records. He could not help but think to himself, is Wuxiang or the Blood Garment Pavilion also arranging a new identity for me? From today onwards, you are not only the Blood Garment assassin of the Blood Garment Pavilion, Leng Shiqi. You are no longer just an assassin. You will appear in the world with another identity. We call it birth. Wuxiang's words confirmed Leng Shiqi's thoughts. He thought to himself that it was indeed so. The sect has already prepared a perfect identity for you. No matter who comes to investigate you, they will not reveal any flaws. Now you have a choice. After you birth, it is best to join two forces. It can also be said that you are two completely different branches of the same force. That is, the Discipline Commission and the Dark Thunder Guards. Discipline Commission, Dark Thunder Guards. Leng Shiqi was shocked. Of course he knew these two names. He had even killed xuanhuan, who was a Dark Thunder Guard. Regardless of whether it was the Discipline Commission or the Dark Thunder Guards, they were directly under the jurisdiction of the Thunderblaze dynasty's royal family. However, they were mainly responsible for different things. The Discipline Commission was like the claws and teeth of the Thunderblaze dynasty. It dealt with the conflicts between the dynasty's forces and the spirit cultivator sections. Discipline meant that if it could be suppressed, then it would be suppressed. If it could not be suppressed, then it would be appeased. However, the authority of the discipline department differed greatly from province to province. For example, in the Muqin County and Donglin County, where there were top forces, the Discipline Commission existed in name only. This was because they did not have the ability to suppress the Blood Robe Pavilion or the Mountain Sea sect. However, in other counties they might have monstrous authority and power. As for the people of the Discipline Commission, they had never been liked by the people of the leading sections. Even rogue cultivators looked down on them. Their reputation was extremely bad. As for the Dark Thunder Guards, they were the hidden fangs of the Thunderblaze dynasty. The fundamental purpose of the Dark Thunder Guards was to eliminate all people, things, and things that affected the stability of the dynasty. From supervising the royal family, civil and military officials, to eliminating the spirit cultivators who caused trouble, they were all under their jurisdiction. For example, Xuanhuan was secretly investigated by the Dark Thunder Guards and found evidence of him secretly manufacturing weapons, leading to the execution of Xuanhuan's entire family. For example, the black-veiled woman that Leng Shiqi met in the illusory spirit secret realm was to investigate the 5 devil cultivators who caused trouble. No matter where the Dark Thunder Guards were, they had a lot of power. Even the lowest-level Dark Thunder Guards had the right to act at their own discretion. That meant that they could ignore the laws of the Thunderblaze dynasty and directly act first and report later. Therefore, the Dark Thunder Guards were hated by the people of the dynasty. And now Wuxiang actually asked Leng Shiqi to choose one of them. Leng Shiqi had already vaguely guessed what the Blood Robe Pavilion was going to do. They were clearly asking him to be a spy. However, the Discipline Commission was on bad terms with the spirit cultivators of the world. The Dark Thunder Guards were hated by the various forces of the dynasty. Neither of these were good places to go. If he had to choose between the two, Leng Shiqi hesitated for a moment, but he was still more willing to choose the Dark Thunder Guards. Perhaps it was because he was used to walking in the dark that he would be more proficient in doing things in the dark. Moreover, the Dark Thunder Guards had the right to act at their own discretion, which also gave him some initiative. Thus he said, "Disciple is willing to go to the Dark Thunder Guards." Wuxiang nodded and said, "Yes, I will arrange this for you as soon as possible. Take these things back and take a good look. Be sure to memorize every word and sentence." Disciple understands. Leng Shiqi cupped his hands and said. Then he casually opened a page of the book, but there was a name that he would never have dreamed of, Lu Xingji. Chapter 301. At night, Leng Shiqi locked himself in a secret room in his room. He carefully read through everything about Lu Xingji. In this information from the day Lu Xingji was born, it recorded in detail all the people and things he had come in contact with. When Lu Xingji was 12 years old, he was accepted as a disciple by a wandering spirit cultivator and went to travel around. The strange thing was, when Leng Shiqi looked at these things, he actually had a feeling that he had experienced them before. This kind of feeling actually made him shudder. He began to suspect that these things, were they things that this body had experienced before? In other words, this Lu Xingji was actually him. Leng Shiqi formed a guess in his mind. Lu Xingji was a native of this world. Before the age of 12, he grew up happily like an ordinary child. But when he was 12 years old, he was discovered to have a high cultivation talent and was thrown into the Blood Fog Island. Lu Xingji died not long after in the Blood Fog Island and was replaced by another Lu Xingji who came from another world, which was the current Leng Shiqi. The more Leng Shiqi thought about it, the more he felt that this was very likely, and it seemed very reasonable. But Leng Shiqi thought of another illogical existence. If it was really as he guessed, and the information given by Wuxiang was the original experience of this body, then why was there a need to prepare so well? These were originally the memories of Lu Xingji. Why was there a need to prepare detailed information about what happened every day? Moreover, it was impossible for a person to remember everything that happened when they were young. This would make it seem like there were many traces left behind. This made Leng Shiqi's heart beat like a drum, and he was a little unable to confirm his initial speculation. He racked his brains for a long time, but still could not find the most reasonable explanation. In the end, he could only bury all of this in his heart and wait for the opportunity to inquire about it in the future. Next, he continued to absorb the explosive amount of information about Lu Xingji. Even with his strong mental strength, it took him until the fourth day to completely remember Lu Xingji's life. At this time he also found a loophole in the information. That was, according to the information, Lu Xingji became a disciple of a spirit cultivator when he was 12 years old. That spirit cultivator was called Chu Hejing, a powerful rogue cultivator in the realm of unity of heaven and man. However, Leng Shiqi did not know Chu Hejing at all, let alone being Chu Hejing's disciple. He should have some inheritance, right? He did not have any at all. Another point was that the information in the information was that Lu Xingji's information, which was very much at the age of his age. But since it was perfect's information, there must have been some kind of arrangement. Coincidentally, Wuxiang had actually come looking for him at this moment. The strange thing was that Wuxiang had actually appeared directly in his private room. He clasped his hands, clasped his clasped hands, clasped his hands clasped. Disciple, Gren, asked. Shiqi's in, every word has been engraved in disciple's mind. Leng Shiqi said confidently. Very good, master will take you to a place. Shiqi said as he grabbed Leng Shiqi's arm. Leng Shiqi felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, in the next moment, the scenery around him suddenly changed and his eyes spun. When he finally stepped on the ground, he was already in an abnormally dark room. This darkness was nothing to a spirit pulse realm cultivator, and he could see clearly with his spirit energy. He immediately saw that there was an abnormally complex spirit array in the room. At this moment he and Shiqi were standing in the middle of the array. Shiqi waved his hand and hundreds of sparkling and translucent spirit stones fell precisely into the grooves around the array. Leng Shiqi looked at the abnormally dense spirit stones, and his heart trembled. Every spirit stone was actually a middle-grade spirit stone. Every middle-grade spirit stone's value was more than 100 times that of a normal spirit stone. Wuxiang was throwing money away. Leng Shiqi couldn't help but ask, Master, where are we? Shiqi said proudly, this is an inter-province teleportation formation. There are only a few in the entire Thunderfire dynasty, and our Blood Garment Pavilion has one. Inter-province teleportation formation? Although Leng Shiqi didn't know how far the teleportation formation could go, he knew that they would be going to a very far place. Wuxiang explained, next we'll go to the place where you'll join the Dark Thunder Guards. We'll erase your identity as a member of the Blood Clothing Pavilion. We'll have to choose a place very far away from Yukon County. Hearing this, Leng Shiqi nodded lightly. Soon after, mysterious spirit arrays lit up in the array, and the two of them gradually disappeared. The 6 kingdoms of the western regions were small countries sandwiched between the Thunderfire dynasty and the Starfall dynasty. Among the 6 kingdoms, the largest was only about the size of 2 provinces in the Thunderfire dynasty. The smallest was not even half the size of a province. The reason why the 6 kingdoms still existed was because they were equivalent to a buffer zone between the Thunderfire dynasty and the Starfall dynasty. No matter which side wanted to send troops, they had to first cross the 6 kingdoms of the western regions. This way the other side would naturally have enough time to react. The Western Desolation County was the westernmost province of the Thunderfire dynasty. It also bordered the Zhulu Kingdom and the Gaoji Kingdom of the 6 kingdoms of the western regions. Although the Western Desolation County had the word desolation in its name, it wasn't actually desolate. On the contrary, it was abnormally prosperous. Because the Thunderfire dynasty accepted all kinds of people, they didn't reject the 6 kingdoms of the western regions and even vigorously promoted all kinds of trade. Therefore, a large number of merchants from the 6 kingdoms of the western regions could be seen coming and going in the Western Desolation County. It was extraordinarily lively. On this day, 2 guests came to the capital of the Western Desolation County, Western Desolation City. One of them was a slightly plump middle-aged man. His face was very ordinary, but he had a small mustache and wore a small red round hat on his head. He looked a little funny. But absolutely no one would have thought that this funny-looking man was actually the famous Nether Blood Cloak assassin of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, Wuxiang. So the one beside him was naturally Leng Shiqi. But at this moment, Leng Shiqi was showing his original appearance, but also not his original appearance. According to Wuxiang, Leng Shiqi's true appearance was too young and didn't match his cultivation. Using external objects to change one's appearance could fool ordinary people, but those true experts would still see through it. At that time, trying to cover it up would only make it more conspicuous. So, Leng Shiqi's current appearance was because he had taken a strange pill similar to hormones, which caused his body to develop ahead of time. He also grew a mustache and looked like a strong man around 30 years old. The two of them had directly crossed several provinces and counties from the Mukong County to the Western Desolation County through the inter-province transportation formation. As it turned out, Wuxiang wanted Leng Shiqi to join the Dark Thunder Guards of the Western Desolation County. And the reason why he was able to arrange for Leng Shiqi to join was because he had a close relationship with the inspector of the Dark Thunder Guards of the Western Desolation County. No, to be more precise, Lu Xingji's master, Chu Hejing, had a close relationship with the inspector of the Western Desolation County, Yu Ruifeng. Wuxiang was Chu Hejing. Chapter 302. The Western Wilderness City was a city with a large flow of people, and people from the western regions could be seen everywhere. However, there was a very wide but desolate street in the Western Wilderness City. The reason was that the Dark Thunder Mansion was located in this street. This was the headquarters of the Dark Thunder Guards in the Western Wilderness Prefecture. The Dark Thunder Guards were notorious in the imperial court. Many high officials and nobles avoided them, so this street was deserted. Leng Shiqi followed Wuxiang to the gate of the Dark Thunder Mansion. Wuxiang handed over a name card, and soon a group of 5 people came out to welcome them. The leader was an old man with sharp eyes. He was not young, but there was still a trace of sharpness in his body. He was the inspector of the Dark Thunder Guards in the Western Wilderness Prefecture, Yu Ruifeng, who had the cultivation of oneness of heaven and men. He was responsible for patrolling the entire Western Wilderness Prefecture, and was a real figure with real power. The 4 people behind him were also in Gang Spirit Realm. They were the inspectors in charge of monitoring the Western Wilderness Prefecture. Yu Ruifeng greeted them with a smile. "Brother Chu, long time no see. Please come in." Wuxiang, who was Chu Hejing, said with a smile, "You don't have to be so polite with me. Please come in." Seeing Leng Shiqi, Yu Ruifeng said, "Oh? This little brother must be Brother Chu's disciple Lu Xingji." "Ah, it's my disciple Lu Xingji. Why don't you greet the seniors?" Wuxiang said to Leng Shiqi. Leng Shiqi immediately cupped his hands and said, "Junior Lu Xingji greets Martial Uncle Yu and seniors." Yu Ruifeng and the others stared at Leng Shiqi for a few seconds, and then he exclaimed, "Nephew, you have the cultivation of middle-stage spiritual pulse realm at such a young age. It's true that a famous teacher produces a brilliant disciple." "Ah." Wuxiang laughed and said, "It's not worth mentioning. My disciple still has a lot to learn." Hearing this, Yu Ruifeng's eyes flashed with a trace of shrewdness, and he said with a smile, "Brother Chu, nephew, let's talk in the hall." They chatted and laughed as they walked into the hall. Leng Shiqi followed them silently. Everyone took their seats and chatted for a while. Leng Shiqi found that Yu Ruifeng didn't seem to be pretending to smile at Wuxiang, but was really enthusiastic. Wuxiang saw that the small talk was almost over, so he began to talk about the main topic. "Brother Yu, I'm ashamed to say this, but I actually have a request for you this time." Yu Ruifeng didn't look surprised. He had already guessed what was going on the moment he saw Leng Shiqi. "Brother Chu, what are you talking about? If there's anything you want, just say it. As long as it's within my power, I'll definitely agree." Leng Shiqi was a little surprised. He didn't know what kind of magic potion Yu Ruifeng had fed him, but he agreed without even hearing the request. "This matter is related to my good-for-nothing disciple." Wuxiang pointed at Leng Shiqi and said, "My disciple's cultivation is barely passable, but he still lacks a lot of training. I came this time to find an opportunity for him to gain experience." He came to find an opportunity to gain experience, but he came to the Dark Thunder Guard. The meaning of Wuxiang's words was very obvious. At this time, the eyes of the 4 inspectors flashed. The Dark Thunder Guard was not a place that anyone could enter casually. The Dark Thunder Guard's duty was to monitor the world, so the most basic requirement to enter the Dark Thunder Guard was to have a clean background. Even your 3 generations of ancestors will be thoroughly investigated. Anyone who has the slightest bit of criminal past will not be allowed to enter. It didn't matter how good your talent was or how high your cultivation was. The first requirement of the Dark Thunder Guard was to be completely loyal to the royal family. Wuxiang's request could be said to be easy, but it could also be said to be difficult. The main thing was to see if Lu Xingji's identity was clean enough. If his background was clean, it didn't matter if he did a favor. If there were some traces of his background, it wouldn't be easy to handle. However, what the four inspectors didn't expect was that Yu Ruifeng would agree to it so easily. He said, I thought it was something important. Brother Chu came in person for such a small matter? Actually, you only need to send a letter. The four inspectors were all shrewd people, but at this time they couldn't help showing traces of shock. In their impression, Yu Ruifeng was an extremely strict person. How could he agree to Chu Hejing's request so easily? Letting Leng Shiqi enter the Dark Thunder Guard without asking or investigating was against the rules of the Dark Thunder Guard. It was also inconsistent with Yu Ruifeng's usual style. What was the relationship between Yu Ruifeng and Chu Hejing? It wasn't just them, even Leng Shiqi thought the same. Wu Xiang said, I won't make things difficult for Brother Yu. Brother, you can investigate my disciple's background as you wish. I won't break the rules of the Dark Thunder Guard. Yu Ruifeng said with a smile, let's not talk about this for now. I see that nephew has the cultivation of the middle stage of the Spirit Pulse realm. It's a bit of a waste of talent to just be a Dark Thunder Guard. By the way, do you have any empty inspectors under your rule? The four inspectors almost sprained their tongues. They began to wonder if Yu Ruifeng had said something wrong. Inspector? That was a position that only the Spirit Aperture realm had the qualifications to hold. Not only did the cultivation have to be high enough, but they also had to have the corresponding ability and experience. Hearing Yu Ruifeng's words, he wanted Lu Xingji to directly be an inspector? One of them said carefully, Lord Yu, nephew Lu has such a cultivation at such a young age. It's amazing. However, if he becomes an inspector with the cultivation of the Spirit Pulse realm, I'm afraid there will be people who won't accept it. Yu Ruifeng glanced at him and said coldly, Duan Chun, are you questioning my decision? Duan Chun immediately stood up and said, this subordinate doesn't dare. Didn't your North County lose a supervisor not long ago? Why don't you let nephew Lu replace him? Yu Ruifeng's tone was normal this time, but there was an unquestionable meaning in it. This subordinate understands. This subordinate will go prepare the transfer order. Duan Chun said and left. Yu Ruifeng turned to Wu Xiang and said, Brother Chu, are you satisfied? Wu Xiang said happily, Brother Yu is too serious. It's good enough that my disciple has a chance to gain experience. I'm afraid he won't be able to take up the position of inspector. I see that nephew Lu isn't a fish in a pond. A mere inspector is nothing. Xingji, why aren't you thanking Martial Uncle Yu? Leng Shiqi was just about to stand up when Yu Ruifeng pressed his hand down. A gentle force pressed him back down. Yu Ruifeng said, Brother Chu, you're being too polite. It's not worth mentioning. By the way, tonight we brothers won't go home until we're drunk. Okay, we won't go home until we're drunk. Late at night, Leng Shiqi supported the drunk Wu Xiang back to the room Yu Ruifeng arranged for them. As soon as they entered the room, Wu Xiang raised his hand and set up an isolation restriction. He didn't look drunk at all. Chapter 303. Leng Shiqi saw that Wu Xiang's expression wasn't good and had many questions. For example, what was the relationship between Wu Xiang and Yu Ruifeng? But he didn't ask. If he could find out, Wu Xiang would naturally tell him. Wu Xiang said calmly, originally, with your cultivation, you were the most suitable person to be the Dark Lightning Envoy. Even if you came in through the back door, others wouldn't say anything. But Yu Ruifeng directly arranged for you to be the supervisor. The supervisor is a position with real power. Even normal Spirit Aperture realm cultivators may not have the qualifications to take up this position. He wants to push you into the teeth of the storm. Once you can't hold this position, you won't be able to stay in the Dark Lightning Guards. This way he has returned my favor and didn't break the rules of the Dark Lightning Guards. His move of retreating in order to advance is really brilliant. At this point, Wu Xiang changed the topic. But he definitely didn't expect you to be able to sit in this position. You also have to sit tight. Leng Shiqi knew that this matter was of great importance. Since he had already chosen the Dark Lightning Guards, he could only follow this path to the end. Even if taking over the supervisor position would bring him endless pressure and trouble, he had to endure it. Disciple understands. Seeing Leng Shiqi's attitude, Wu Xiang nodded his head in satisfaction. Yu Ruifeng will definitely investigate your background and he will even turn it upside down. But you don't have to worry, he won't find anything. Tomorrow you can take the transfer order and take up the position. Master believes in your ability and will of course support you. Take this first. Wu Xiang took out a mustard seed bag and gave it to Leng Shiqi. Leng Shiqi used his mental power to check it and was immediately stunned. This mustard seed bag was filled with cultivation resources. Just the third transformation spirit pills alone had a total of 30 pills, each of which was worth several hundred spirit stones. In addition, there were 5,000 spirit stones and all kinds of pills that spirit aperture realm cultivators could use. And what made Leng Shiqi the most happy was that there were cultivation methods and spiritual skills inside. The cultivation method was called amorphous truth, and was a rank 4 cultivation method. Their spiritual skills were only at the 3rd level, but there were many of them. Sword techniques, saber techniques, finger techniques, leg techniques, staff techniques. This included 18 types of weapons and all types of spiritual techniques. There were even spiritual techniques and illusions. In total, there were over 23rd stage spiritual skills. Leng Shiqi secretly swallowed his saliva. He had never seen so many spiritual techniques in front of him, and all of them were real. He actually felt like he had made a windfall. Wu Xiang said, "Since you're Chu Hejing's disciple, your techniques should have some traces of your master. These are spiritual techniques that I often used when I was young. You can use them as you wish. I also know that your perception is extremely high, and I believe that you will be able to cultivate it very quickly. That is why I am giving it to you now. With these, there is no possibility of your identity being exposed. In addition, it will be difficult for you to secure the position of supervisor by yourself." Wu Xiang took out a blood-red token and said, "Of course, the Blood Cloak Pavilion won't just throw you into the Dark Thunder Guard. Your only mission in the Dark Thunder Guard is to climb up by hook or by crook. The higher you climb, the better. Yu Ruifeng gave you the position of supervisor, which is also a great opportunity for you. You must remember that you are not fighting alone. The Blood Cloak Pavilion is your backing. With this silver-striped Blood Kill token, you can mobilize anyone under the golden-striped Blood Cloak Assassin in the Western Desolate Province. You can also mobilize the entire intelligence network in the Western Desolate Province." Hearing this, Leng Shiqi couldn't help but inwardly take in a cold breath. With this token, he could mobilize any spirit aperture realm assassin as well as a huge intelligence network. This was a great power. In the Western Desolate Province, his power was probably second only to the head of the pavilion. However, Leng Shiqi also knew that the Blood Cloak Pavilion gave him such great power, and he also had a great responsibility. Although Wu Xiang didn't say what the Blood Seed plan was, Leng Shiqi could guess that the Blood Cloak Pavilion wanted him to climb up to the position of Dark Thunder Guard commander. Not only him, there was also Delta Origi, Yushu, and Xiong Ming. Sooner or later, the 3 of them would be arranged into different forces. With the secret support of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, they could quickly rise up to the top. In the future, the 4 of them would very likely be in charge of a powerful force. At that time, they would have the opportunity to help the Blood Cloak Pavilion break the deadlock and soar to the top. This was the Blood Seed plan. You are a smart person. This is all I have to say. As for where you can climb in the future, it will depend on your own ability." Wu Xiang then removed the isolation restriction and went back to his room to rest. Leng Shiqi also went back to his room. The first thing he did was to use his unlimited skill points to learn all the cultivation methods and spiritual skills. And all of them were cultivated to the Great Perfection realm. With so many spiritual skills, not only did Leng Shiqi's combat power increase, but it also gave him more possibilities to fuse spiritual skills. Then he began to plan in his mind how he could secure his position as a supervisor. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. Not only Leng Shiqi but in Lanqi City hundreds of miles away, there were also 4 people who could not sleep. They were sitting in a circle with gloomy expressions. The atmosphere was very solemn. They were the Dark Lightning envoys of the West Desolate Province's North County. They were all in the spiritual pulse realm. Among them, the one with the highest cultivation was a gray-haired old man in his 60s or 70s. He was in the 8th level of the spiritual pulse realm. The 2 people sitting on his left and right were in the middle stage of the spiritual pulse realm. Opposite him was an early-stage spiritual pulse realm cultivator. You all know the news from the West Desolate Province's headquarters, right? The old man's voice was a bit harsh. The other 3 nodded in agreement. Every branch of the Dark Thunder Guard had a sound transmission array, which was used to transmit information quickly. Not long ago, they all knew that a new supervisor would be appointed in a few days. The person on the right of the old man said, "Brother Gong Sun Bing, could it be that the headquarters sent the wrong news?" Gong Sun Bing said in annoyance, "How can the news from the great supervisor be fake? Qiu Qing, are you questioning the great supervisor?" Qiu Qing was inexplicably rebuked and did not say anything. The tall and sturdy man opposite him said, "Brother Gong Sun, why did the higher-ups send us a spiritual pulse realm middle-stage supervisor? Even if Lanqi City is very remote, this is too perfunctory. If a spiritual pulse realm cultivator can be a supervisor, Brother Gong Sun, you are the most suitable." Finally, the early-stage spiritual pulse realm cultivator said, Brother Peng Yuan is right. Suck. Gong Sun Bing sighed deeply and said, I specially paid a high price to use a sound transmission array to contact a good friend in the West Desolate Province's headquarters. Only then did I know that the new supervisor was personally appointed by the patrol inspector Yu. It is said that someone used their connections to send him in. So he went in through the back door. The others immediately showed disdainful expressions. Chapter 304. Most of the people in the Dark Lightning Guards were selected and trained when they were young. Those who were able to stand out from the rest were those who had worked hard for themselves. Take Gong Sun Bing for example. He had been in the Dark Lightning Guards for more than 30 years. He was very senior and had high prestige. He was quite famous around Mist City. But he was still a Dark Lightning envoy and not a supervisor. It was because his cultivation was not high enough. This was the rule of the Dark Lightning Guards, so he had nothing to say. But now, there was someone whose cultivation was lower than his, who had no foundation or qualifications, to be the supervisor, his superior. This made him feel very unconvinced in his heart. Especially since the previous supervisor had died in an accident during a mission and the headquarters hadn't sent a new supervisor yet. The cities around Mist City were all under his jurisdiction. He could be considered to have experienced the power of a supervisor, and even sought a lot of personal benefits from it. But now, he had to hand over all these rights to someone who was far inferior to him. Thus he had other thoughts. Gong Sun Bing looked at the other three and said, Lu Xingji will be taking over in a few days. What do you all plan to do? What do we do? Qiu Qing said, What else can we do? Just do what we usually do. But when he spoke, his eyes darted around, not daring to look directly at Gong Sun Bing. Gong Sun Bing sneered and said, Qiu Qing, you're right. Then, are you going to keep those resources that you keep for yourself? Qiu Qing's expression changed instantly. Gong Sun Bing continued, You want to hide this little trick from my eyes? I'm just taking into account that you're a senior and have worked hard even if you didn't make any contributions. It's fine to take some small advantages. What I'm more curious about is whether the new supervisor will mind it or not. Qiu Qing's expression changed again and again. He immediately put on a smile and said, Hey, what new supervisor? This little brother will definitely support brother Gong Sunday. He could tell that Gong Sun Bing didn't seem to want to hand over his power. He wanted to make this new supervisor a mere figurehead. Qiu Qing felt that since Lu Xingji could become the supervisor, this person might not have any ability, but he definitely had a background. He didn't want to offend him. But now that Gong Sun Bing had something on him, it was no longer up to him. One of the duties of the Dark Thunder Guards was to monitor corruption. His actions had also violated a great taboo. If he was exposed, he would be severely punished. He might even lose his cultivation and be expelled from the Dark Thunder Guards. Gong Sun Bing nodded satisfactorily. Among the 4 Dark Lightning envoys, Peng Yuan had always been his follower. As for Qiao Qian, who had just become a Dark Lightning envoy, he had never placed him in his eyes. Qiu Qing was the only one he couldn't control. Now that he had tied him to the same boat, he didn't have any worries. Then he said, That's good. Let's make arrangements for the next few days and prepare to welcome the new supervisor. 5 days later, there were 70 to 80 people gathered in front of the Dark Thunder Manor. They were all Dark Thunder Guards who were in charge of monitoring the surrounding cities. These people were usually scattered to carry out all kinds of missions. Today they were gathered here to welcome the new supervisor. Not long after, Lung Shiqi arrived in front of the Dark Thunder Manor in Mistchi City wearing a black robe embroidered with thunder patterns. Everyone saw the fire pattern on his shoulder, which was the sign of a supervisor. They knew that he was the new supervisor. Gong Sun Bing led everyone to welcome him and said in unison, Greetings, supervisor. This was the first time Ling Shiqi saw Gong Sun Bing and the others. He immediately sensed their cultivation. He was quite curious as to how they knew he would enter the city today. Lung Shiqi took out his transfer order and said to Gong Sun Bing, who was standing at the front, This is the transfer order. You can take a look. Gong Sun Bing smiled and said, You must be joking. How can the transfer order be fake? Your humble servant Gong Sun Bing greets you. The 3 people behind him also cupped their fists and said, Your humble servant Qiu Cheng. Peng Yuan. Qiao Qian. Even the dozens of Dark Thunder Guards behind him said in unison, Greetings, supervisor. Lung Shiqi said indifferently, You don't have to be so polite. Gong Sun Bing saw Lung Shiqi's indifferent appearance and couldn't figure out his temperament. However, this didn't change his plan. He seemed to be relieved and said, Lan Chi City finally welcomes a supervisor. With a spirit aperture realm expert in charge, many things will be much easier. Gong Sun Bing immediately used Leng Shiqi's cultivation to make an issue out of it. Leng Shiqi's cultivation was at the 5th level of the Spirit Pulse realm. It was a joke for him to be a supervisor at this level. He specially gathered all the Dark Thunder Guards nearby just to see Leng Shiqi make a fool of himself. In his opinion, Leng Shiqi's cultivation couldn't be faked. The Spirit Pulse realm was the Spirit Pulse realm. He had to admit this point. Once Leng Shiqi revealed his cultivation, the Dark Thunder Guards would definitely be in an uproar. As the new supervisor, he would instantly lose all his prestige. Leng Shiqi looked coldly at Gong Sun Bing. He knew that the other party was trying to intimidate him. Normal Dark Thunder Guards didn't know about the supervisor's transfer, but Gong Sun Bing and the other 4 Dark Thunder Guards definitely knew about it in advance. Now that Gong Sun Bing mentioned Leng Shiqi's cultivation, his purpose was obvious. Leng Shiqi only said one word, "Oh." "What oh?" Gong Sun Bing was stunned. What kind of answer was this? In his expectations, Leng Shiqi might fly into a rage in front of everyone, or he might feel ashamed, or he might just remain silent. However, he didn't expect to get an "oh." Leng Shiqi said again, "Won't you let me in?" Gong Sun Bing shivered and hurriedly said, "This humble one has been rude. Sir, this way please." The 5 of them came to the conference hall. As for the others, they dispersed. Leng Shiqi sat on the main seat and said, "You are all Dark Thunder Guards of Mist City's Dark Thunder Manor. You have worked hard and have a lot of experience. I'm new here, so I don't know much about the Dark Lightning Guards in Misty Chi City. Therefore, I'll still need your guidance in the future." When Xiao Qing heard this, he felt that this new supervisor didn't seem like a difficult person to get along with. He thought to himself, maybe he knows that his cultivation isn't high, so he doesn't dare to be overbearing. Among the 4 of them, only the youngest, Xiao Qian, nodded in response to Leng Shiqi. Gong Sun Bing then said, "Sir, what are you saying? We don't dare to give guidance. If you have anything to say, just tell us." "Okay, then is there anything around Mist City that requires my attention recently?" Gong Sun Bing shook his head and said, "Sir, everything has been calm recently. There's nothing that requires your attention." Hearing this, Leng Shiqi sneered in his heart. Chapter 305. Leng Shiqi was not unprepared before coming here and on the way here. Although Lanqi City was located in the north of the West Wilderness Prefecture, it was much more remote compared to the West Wilderness City. However, there were several trade routes that connected to the 6 nations of the West Wilderness near Lanqi City. Therefore, people from various nations came and went in the cities around Lanqi City, making it easy for spies to sneak in and cause trouble. Moreover, it had been more than half a month since the previous supervisor of Lanqi City died in the line of duty. There should be a lot of things piled up in the Dark Thunder Guard. Yet, Gong Sun Bing said that there was nothing for him to deal with? This wasn't just a show of strength, but a figurehead. "Are you sure there's nothing at all?" Leng Shiqi asked again. Gong Sun Bing nodded with certainty. Leng Shiqi looked at the other 3 and saw that they had the same reaction. "Ha," Leng Shiqi laughed, "that's good. Looks like I'll have an easy time in the future." "It's our duty to share your worries, Lord," Gong Sun Bing said with a meaningful tone. Leng Shiqi said, "All right, I'm a little tired from the journey. You guys can leave first." Seeing Leng Shiqi's attitude, Gong Sun Bing secretly smiled and left with the other 3. This ending was within Gong Sun Bing's expectations. As a Spirit Pulse Realm supervisor, Leng Shiqi didn't have the strength, experience, or prestige. He really didn't know whether to turn hostile or not. In the end, he could only remain silent. From today onwards, he, Gong Sun Bing, would be the supervisor of the several cities around Lanqi City. After walking out of the conference hall, Peng Yuan immediately said excitedly, "Big brother Gong Sun, from today onwards you're in charge of Lanqi City's Dark Thunder Manor." Gong Sun Bing smiled, "You can't say that. After all, we still have to listen to the supervisor." "Ah." As for Leng Shiqi, he sat on the main seat with a cold expression on his face, and he sat there for half a day. It wasn't until evening that he went to the supervisor's courtyard and immediately summoned Gong Sun Bing. When Gong Sun Bing received the summons, he was a little confused. He didn't know what Leng Shiqi wanted to do. However, he was full of confidence. Now that the entire Dark Thunder Manor belonged to him, what was there to be afraid of? "I would like to see what kind of tricks this Lu Xingji can play." Not long after, Gong Sun Bing walked into Leng Shiqi's study and saw Leng Shiqi playing with a dagger. The dagger flashed with cold light from time to time. Gong Sun Bing smiled inwardly. This supervisor was so idle. He cupped his hands and said, "Lord Lu, may I know why you called this lowly one?" Leng Shiqi put down the dagger after a few breaths, as if he had just noticed Gong Sunbing's arrival. He said, "Nothing, I just have a small favor to ask of you." "Sir, what are your orders?" Gong Sunbing was also very confused. He didn't know what Leng Shiqi was planning. Leng Shiqi picked up a letter on the table and said, "This letter, I'll have to trouble you to personally deliver it to Lord Yu." Deliver a letter? Gong Sunbing was naturally unhappy. Delivering a letter was such a small thing for an experienced Dark Thunder envoy to do? However, he couldn't refuse immediately. Because this letter was for Yu Ruifeng. This was the boss of all the Dark Thunder Guards in the Western Desolate Prefecture. An ordinary Dark Thunder Guard might not even see this supervisor in their lifetime. If he could see Yu Ruifeng and leave a good impression, he would benefit a lot. To be honest, he really wanted to go. However, on second thought, Leng Shiqi was personally appointed by Yu Ruifeng. This meant that their relationship wasn't shallow. Today he had just shown his power to Leng Shiqi, and now he was going to deliver a letter? The reason why he dared to make Leng Shiqi a figurehead was because his cultivation wasn't high, and because the emperor was far away here. The headquarters rarely cared about matters here. The contents of this letter wouldn't be a complaint against him, right? But then again, although Leng Shiqi was made a figurehead by them, he was still a supervisor on the surface. If he were to reject this matter, it would be equivalent to him being accused of disobeying his honor's order. To deliver or not to deliver? Gong Sunbing hesitated. Leng Shiqi wasn't in a hurry. He played with the dagger again and waited patiently. After a while, Gong Sunbing nodded and said, "Since Sir has given the order, how could I dare to disobey?" Being able to see Yu Ruifeng was an opportunity. He didn't want to give it up. This trip to the Western Desolate City, he could also carefully inquire about Leng Shiqi's background. As for the contents of the letter, he could change it however he wanted. There was no shortage of people in the Dark Thunder Guards who could imitate handwriting. Very good. This matter is very urgent. Pack up and set off. Now. Gong Sunbing was slightly surprised. Leng Shiqi said with a serious face, "The sooner the better. Thank you for your hard work." "Okay, I will go and prepare." Gong Sunbing turned and left. But what he didn't know was that Leng Shiqi looked at his back with a murderous look in his eyes. After Gong Sunbing left Leng Shiqi's room, he didn't rush to set off. Instead, he called Qiu Qing and the others over and told them about the letter. Qiu Qing said, "Brother Gong Sun, this Lu Xingji wants to send you away." Gong Sunbing sneered and said, "Humph, how can I not see through such a small trick? If I'm not wrong, Lu Xingji will definitely contact you tomorrow. Remember, there is no room for negotiation between us. You should all know what to do." Gong Sunbing glanced at the three people and finally his eyes fell on Qiu Qing. Qiu Qing immediately said, "Brother Gong Sun, don't worry. Since we are all in the same boat, I know what to do." Gong Sunbing continued, "I will set off as soon as possible. I will be back in 7 or 8 days. Just pretend that he doesn't exist for the next few days." After that, he quickly left the city with a trusted aide. This trusted aide was someone who was good at imitating other people's handwriting. At the same time, a figure suddenly appeared in Leng Shiqi's room. Leng Shiqi was very calm. He said, "Thousand Face. Western Baron State Branch, black-striped blood-clothed assassin Thousand Face. Greetings, sir." The person who came was a black-striped blood-clothed assassin. Thousand Face was the helper that Leng Shiqi transferred from the Western Baron State Branch. But he was still on a mission and just arrived. Leng Shiqi stood up straight and said, "You came at the right time. Imitate me." Pink ripples of light appeared around Thousand Face, and immediately after an identical Leng Shiqi appeared. Leng Shiqi circled Thousand Face twice and exclaimed, "Wonderful! Even I almost couldn't see through it." "There are still flaws. Thousand Face is not good enough. Please forgive me, sir." Leng Shiqi ordered, "This is enough. Tonight you will replace me here. If things go well, I will be back tomorrow morning." Thousand Face obeys. Then Leng Shiqi's body sank into the ground. Tonight he was going to kill someone. Chapter 306. The moonlight tonight was very beautiful. Under the moonlight, 2 horses were galloping on the official road. The 2 people on the horses were Gong Sunbing and his trusted aide, Hang Su. If a Spirit Pulse Realm cultivator were to run at full speed, their speed would not be slower than a horse. However, galloping for such a long distance was naturally not possible. At this moment, Gong Sunbing stopped his horse. "Hang Su, let's sleep nearby tonight and rest for a few hours." "Yes, Lord Gong Sun." Hang Su led the horse to the side and began to prepare the things for the camp as if she was familiar with it. For the Dark Thunder Guards, sleeping in the wilderness at night was very normal. They were already used to it. Soon Hang Su set up a simple tent and said, "Lord Gongsun, you rest first. I'll keep watch." Gongsun Bing had a lot on his mind and didn't chat with Hang Su. He nodded and sat down in the tent. At this moment he had a faint feeling that something was wrong. Everything was going too smoothly. It was true that he intended to make the new supervisor a figurehead, but in his original plan, this was something that would be done slowly, like peeling silk from a cocoon. However, Leng Shiqi's attitude today was as if he had given up. At first, Gongsun Bing felt that Leng Shiqi was too young. However, the fact that Leng Shiqi had asked him to deliver the letter showed that Leng Shiqi still had some shrewdness. Thinking about the letter, Gongsun Bing took out the letter Leng Shiqi gave him from his mustard seed bag. He didn't hesitate to open the letter. There wasn't much content in the letter, so Gongsun Bing quickly finished reading it. He let out a cold snort. As I expected, it really is a letter of complaint. To use such childish methods, it's really childish. After reading the letter, the worry in Gongsun Bing's heart dissipated. It turned out that the new supervisor, Lu Xingji, didn't have any real ability. He carefully thought about it for a while and felt that there wouldn't be any problems even if he left for a few days, so he began to cultivate. Hang Su had been patrolling the surroundings. After an unknown period of time, Hang Su suddenly heard a faint sobbing sound in her ears. Even though he was at the spirit transformation realm, his heart trembled when he heard this sound in the middle of the night in the wilderness. He immediately looked around vigilantly, but there was no one in his field of vision. Did I hear wrongly? However, just as he was doubting himself, the sobbing sound appeared again, and it was right next to his ear. Hang Su instantly turned around, but there was still no one behind him. However, the fact that there was no one there made Hang Su turn pale with fright. Because Gongsun Bing was also gone. Hang Su was dumbfounded. Gongsun Bing was less than 10 zhang away from him, and there was even a simple tent set up by him. However, at this time his surroundings were desolate. There was nothing. All he did was turn around. What was going on? At this moment he suddenly felt an extreme chill, as if the vitality in his body was rapidly disappearing. Hang Su opened his mouth and wanted to cry for help, but unfortunately he didn't even have the strength to make a sound. Meanwhile, Gongsun Bing suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at Hang Su, who was standing not far away, and then glanced around, but he didn't find anything abnormal. That's strange. I clearly sensed a trace of spiritual energy fluctuation just now. How did it disappear all of a sudden? Gongsun Bing murmured. As a veteran of the Dark Thunder Guards, he wasn't a fool. He was very good at capturing spirit force and sensing danger. Hang Su. Gongsun Bing called out his name. Lord Gongsun, what are your orders? Hang Su replied, but his body didn't move. Gongsun Bing said, nothing. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. It stood to reason that if he called Hang Su would definitely come over. What's more, although it was Hang Su's voice, the direction it came from was a bit off. Just at this moment, a huge wave of spiritual energy appeared beneath him. Immediately, cold air and hot waves of fire intertwined and gushed out from the ground, directly swallowing Gongsun Bing. A demon-like figure suddenly appeared. It was Leng Shiqi, who was wearing the demonic beast blood rune armor. Being affected by this side, Hang Su's body was also shaken to the ground. At this moment he was already dead. To deal with such a spirit transformation realm cultivator, Leng Shiqi only used illusions to silently take his life. Although Gongsun Bing was aware of the danger, he didn't expect that the person who ambushed him was actually a spirit caster. Under the sweeping of the ice and fire tornado, everything within a radius of 20 to 30 feet was destroyed. Some places on the ground were charred black, while others were covered in a layer of ice crystals. Gongsun Bing's hands were flying around, each palm containing the power of Vajra Mountain, blocking the power of ice and fire. Leng Shiqi didn't expect to kill an 8th level Spirit Pulse Realm cultivator in one move. He opened his 10 fingers and 10 bloodlines shot out. Each bloodline condensed blood chi and aimed at Gongsun Bing's vital points. Gongsun Bing's expression couldn't help but change. However, what shocked him even more was that the person who was standing in front of him just now had disappeared. But now that he was surrounded by the power of ice and fire, and there were 10 blood-red fingers shooting towards him, he didn't have the spare energy to look for his opponent. Gongsun Bing suddenly clasped his hands together and a thick golden light appeared. The golden light immediately forced back all the ice and fire power. He slammed his palms down and the golden light condensed into a huge palm that slammed down, directly shattering all the bloodlines. However, Gongsun Bing wasn't happy at all. He knew that the most dangerous thing had yet to appear. He hurriedly turned around and formed a seal with his hands. Layers of golden light protected his body. However, there was still no one around him. Who is this expert? Are you willing to show yourself? He couldn't help but feel a little anxious. He had to maintain the seal and it consumed a large amount of spirit energy every second. If this dragged on, he would be the one to die first. Since you don't want to meet me, I will take my leave first. Gong Sun Bing decided to leave. This place was very close to Mishchi City. As long as he was near the city, he would be safe. However, he didn't understand who would come to assassinate him. There were very few people who knew that he had left the city. At this moment, a voice answered him, "Have a safe journey." Gong Sun Bing was shocked when he heard these words. He wasn't surprised by the meaning of these words, but because the owner of this voice was actually Lu Xingji. Immediately, a cold blade aura appeared in front of his eyes. It was as if there was only this blade aura in this world. The blade aura flashed and instantly tore apart the golden light around him. After that, he saw a headless corpse. It was his own body. Chapter 307. Early the next morning, a servant knocked on Leng Shiqi's door. He was here to deliver breakfast to Leng Shiqi. This person kept his head down the moment he entered the room. He planned to leave after placing the breakfast on the table, but before he left, he secretly glanced at Leng Shiqi. He thought to himself, I heard that this new supervisor's authority is about to be taken away. Looking at his tired face, he probably didn't sleep at all last night. Just as he was about to leave the room, Leng Shiqi's voice was heard, "Stop." That person's body immediately stiffened. He asked in a low voice, "Sir, do you have any other orders? You're also a Dark Thunder Guard?" Leng Shiqi's tone was very indifferent. It sounded like he wasn't in a good mood. No, this lowly one's cultivation is low. I'm only qualified to become a Dark Thunder Guard." Leng Shiqi saw that he was indeed only at the pure spirit realm. No wonder he was doing the work of a servant. He asked, "What's your name? How long have you been here?" "This lowly one is Wei Guan. I've been in Dark Thunder Manor for 2 years. Wei Guan, you've been here for quite some time. Let me ask you a few questions." Wei Guan was shocked when he heard this. He was young and his cultivation wasn't high, but he had to go through many rounds of selection to become a reserve member of the Dark Thunder Guard. He immediately guessed that Leng Shiqi might ask him about Dark Thunder Manor. Wei Guan lowered his head so low that it almost touched the ground. "Sir, this lowly one is only a servant. I don't know much about the manor." Leng Shiqi's tone was clearly a little angry. "I haven't even asked and you're already saying you don't know. What, even you don't put this supervisor in your eyes?" Wei Guan trembled and knelt on the ground. This lowly one doesn't dare. Even if this new supervisor didn't have any ability and had his authority taken away by Gong Sun Bing and the others, he was still a supervisor. In Misty Chi City he was his immediate superior. Wei Guan was also in a difficult situation. How did he get involved in the fight between the people above? If he didn't answer the invigilator's question today and was killed, he wouldn't be able to reason with anyone. If he answered and Gong Sun Bing and the others found out about it, he would still be in trouble. Leng Shiqi's eyes flashed as he asked, "What's the relationship between Gong Sun Bing, Pang Yuan, Qiu Qing and Xiao Qian?" Hearing Leng Shiqi's question, Wei Guan let out a sigh of relief. This wasn't a secret and almost everyone knew about it. He said, "Gong Sun Bing is the most senior Dark Thunder envoy in the Dark Thunder Manor in the Mishchi City. He has been here for about 20 years. Even the previous supervisor isn't as senior as him. Therefore his prestige here was very high. He also had many trusted aides in the Dark Thunder Guards, including Pang Yuan, who had been groomed and promoted by him. Pang Yuan's temper was more straightforward, but he was also very straightforward. Qiu Qing could be considered a veteran, but his reputation among the Dark Thunder Guards wasn't very good, mainly because he was a little selfish. He actually disliked Pang Yuan. The two of them would occasionally exchange a few words, but there had never been any conflict between them. As for Xiao Qian, he only became a Dark Thunder envoy after breaking through to the Spirit Pulse realm half a year ago. He's the most junior and usually keeps a low profile. He's kind to people, even to servants like us." Speaking of this, Wei Guan looked up at Leng Shiqi. Leng Shiqi waved his hand and said, "You may leave." Wei Guan immediately wanted to leave as if he had been pardoned, but Leng Shiqi said, "Tell Pang Yuan and the others to meet me in the meeting hall." Wei Guan's heart tightened. He had just finished talking about the Dark Thunder envoys. Why did Leng Shiqi want to rush them? However, this wasn't something he could worry about, so he immediately nodded and left. After a while, Leng Shiqi sat on the main seat in the meeting hall. His right hand's fingers casually tapped the armrest, making ta-ta sounds. Pang Yuan and the others sitting below had different expressions. Pang Yuan had an impatient expression. Qiu Cheng's eyes flashed. Last night, he had guessed that Leng Shiqi would find them today. Now it had come true. However, what he did not understand was that Leng Shiqi had called them here without saying a word. What did this mean? Qiao Qian sat expressionlessly. Just like that, another hour passed. Leng Shiqi was still tapping the armrest. When the sound reached Pang Yuan's ears, it made him even more annoyed. He was not someone who could sit down. At this time he finally could not help but ask. Lord Supervisor, what is the matter with you? If there is nothing else, this lowly subordinate will leave first. Leng Shiqi glanced at him and said coolly, this supervisor hasn't even spoken yet. When is it your turn to speak? Pang Yuan immediately became angry. He stood up, but he suddenly remembered that Gong Sun Bing had said before leaving to pretend Leng Shiqi did not exist. Pang Yuan swallowed back the words in his mouth. Unexpectedly, Leng Shiqi murmured, it's just a dog of Gong Sun Bing. Lu, what did you say? Pang Yuan's anger that he had just suppressed exploded in an instant. He pointed at Leng Shiqi's nose and shouted angrily. When Qiu Qing saw this, he secretly knew that things were bad. He could tell that Leng Shiqi was deliberately targeting Pang Yuan today. Now that Pang Yuan had taken the bait, what would Leng Shiqi do? However, to everyone's surprise, Leng Shiqi laughed. Pang Yuan could not help but be taken aback. His expression became even uglier. What are you laughing at? Leng Shiqi did not answer him. What answered him was a huge devil flame palm. The 6 yang poisonous fire palms slammed out. The violent palm wind instantly overturned all the tables and chairs in the room. The raging devil flames spread out waves of heat, making people feel as if they had fallen into a fiery hell. How could Pang Yuan expect Leng Shiqi to suddenly attack him? In a hurry, he only had time to pull out a spirit saber. His saber aura was like a turbulent wave. The saber aura that appeared suddenly had a terrifying power. However, before he could slash out with his saber, the 6 yang poisonous fire palm had already arrived. Pang Yuan's cultivation was similar to Leng Shiqi's. They were both at the 5th level of the spirit pulse realm. However, Leng Shiqi had multiple high-level cultivation methods. His spiritual power was mutated and he had even opened 10 spirit pulses. Just his foundation alone was much stronger than Pang Yuan's. Under this palm, Pang Yuan was directly sent flying. He spat out several mouthfuls of blood in midair and slammed heavily onto the ground. There was a faint devil flame burning on his body and inside, causing his body to spasm. Leng Shiqi did not show mercy. He stretched out 4 fingers and 4 thunder-like finger forces shot out, leaving 4 bloody holes in Pang Yuan's limbs. Pang Yuan's head tilted and he completely fainted. Qiu Qing and Xiao Qian were both stunned. They were even more horrified. Leng Shiqi's instant explosion and crippled Pang Yuan, who was at the 5th level of the spirit pulse realm, in 2 moves shocked them greatly. You have no respect for your seniors and offended your superiors. You deserve it. Men, take him away.